What's going on, gang, and welcome back to Scared of Normal. I'm Mike Murfitt, joined by my co-host Matt Cordova, and today we are in Longwood, Florida at the Shadow Conspiracy Sparkies Distro headquarters with Ronnie Bonner, the man himself. Dude, thank you so much for the time and jumping on the show with us.
Appreciate you guys having me. It's awesome to have you guys in Bongwood.
Dude, it's sick. When you sent
Bongwood
me,
or Bongmont, where are we at?
Yeah, it's so yeah, because we're in Longmont. So like when you sent me the address last night, I didn't even realize that you would text it to me as Bongmont or Bongwood. And so this morning, as I like put it in, I was like, oh man, I like started laughing so hard because we call Longmont Bongmont. So
It's so funny because I do that to anyone that comes in town from overseas or whatever. I always put it in just so when they're filling out custom forms. I love having them fill out Bongwood.
oh man, dude, they're probably like, this place sounds cool.
It's funny too because Trey Jones' father, Or Jones, is an awesome guy. He's actually from Longwood originally. He actually grew up right down the road.
No way.
And his generation called it Bongwood also. So it's always been Bongwood.
Funny. That's just like what it's known by.
Yeah, just forever.
I love that, dude. Well, it's cool over here, man. Like you just gave us the tour of the whole warehouse and took us across the street to Juvee Hall. And like, yeah, so excited to be here. Like, especially like watching you guys really create and do the construction on Juvee over the last year and then getting to experience it in person. Like that was a treat. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's always fun talking about it because a lot of that shit you don't even think about because you're just doing it. And when it's done, you're like, oh man. And when you get to talk about it, like, oh yeah, that is what we did.
For sure.
Cool.
Even like some of the small details you were showing us in there, like the construction of some of the stuff, like most of that stuff, I feel like to the average person, like they just know it's nice, but it goes over their head that like there's all these little intricate pieces that went into it. And so like getting your take on it and like hearing that you like drew it all up and like all that stuff, like to me just makes that place even more of a cool experience.
I am obsessive on details.
Yes.
Sometimes good, sometimes bad, you know. But I'm such at a point, like when it comes to like a project, I think about things in such a detail that I'll get to a point. I swear I can 3D fly through the project. I can see every aspect.
Just mapped it all
and
out.
I'm all ready to start it, you know. And I'm like, hardest part with that thing is scale, right? When everything scale is hard to visualize.
Certainly.
But I've even got to a point now, I'm like, okay, I can kind of see scale. I can kind of see everything. By the time I think about things to a point where I swear to God, my head hurts after a while, you know.
You're like, I just need to go to bed.
I'll show you my inspiration boards for like Juvee Hall.
I can't wait
and all
to
that
see
stuff.
it.
It was just insane.
Heck yeah,
you know?
dude.
It's like, yeah, so it's cool, man. So what you guys want to talk about today?
Yeah, well, I guess, kicking it off with, for the people who are unfamiliar with you, how would you like briefly describe who you are to somebody new?
Well, my name's Ronnie Bonner, Ronald James Bonner. Depends on who you are. You can call me. Governments call me Ronald. Friends call me Ronnie. Yeah, I'm actually born and raised in Maitland, Florida. Been in Longwood, Seminole County my whole life. Started my journey in business and BMX in 11. Started my first brand at 15, 16 years old.
That's crazy.
You know, so I was in 10th or 11th grade, 12th grade. I went to my final job I ever had. Put in my notice halfway through school year, and I've never had a job since.
At 15, that was like your only real job?
By that point, I was 17-ish or so.
Whoa.
89.
That's a pretty cool accomplishment.
So, I mean, I never thought about it until actually looking back. I'm like, oh shit, that's kind of crazy.
Wow, yeah, not many people can say that. That's a long go at it.
The first brand I started in high school was UGP Underground's products, and that was arguably one of the first action sports brands, mainly focused on BMX, but then it was one of the first brands that actually went into wakeboarding, motorcycles. We had Scott Barley for wakeboarding. We had Mike Mesker for motorcycles, Taj Mihelich. We had Jamie Thomas for skateboarding and stuff like that. So it was a really early on. We weren't the first.
Was that the first lineup?
No, the first pro that I ever sponsored was Greg Lanthorn for racing. He was the first guy I sponsored for UGP. The first pro I sponsored out of Orlando was Dave Clymer from Pennsylvania.
Hell yeah.
And then the first freestyle pro I sponsored was Rob Nolly. I still sponsor Rob Nolly.
That's super cool.
You
Was your like first experience with BMX in the racing world?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, especially here in Florida because obviously we have crap dirt and don't have any. The highest point in Florida is 300 feet.
No
Good
way.
riding typically comes from elevation change.
Yeah.
So the highest point is out west towards where Swampfest is 300 feet. So BMX racing was how we all got. I skated first, was super insane. I had a full half pipe in my backyard, all that kind of stuff. But then I got to BMX. I was like, this rules, man. You can ride anything, and then that kind of, then basically still love skateboarding. I'm still into skateboarding, but that kind of died down. I had Rants in my yard. I had my full UGP screen printing facility in my garage, and I had trails at the end of my road,
Wow. So how did you get into the screen printing stuff? Like, where did that come from when you were, obviously you're riding BMX? Where were you like, I want to start a business through this?
I was in my second year of architect class, and I thought that's what I wanted to do, but I realized my math is so piss poor. And I was like, okay, maybe this isn't the path. And I was digging in a closet, and I found some screen printing equipment. It's just some small screens and whatnot. And I just started printing UGP logos on paper. And I was like, hey, this is kind of, my friends in the class like, oh, that's cool. And then, so I stole everything and brought it home. And then basically just started printing t-shirts, and t-shirts led to me selling at some alternative stores before BMX. Then I made number plates, and from number plates, I made the state plates. And then I made Indiana, Michigan, Florida, Pennsylvania, and maybe Wisconsin in 1989, my high school graduating year. And that made me, I was like, okay, I got this, whatever got this
Made
meant,
some
I
real
didn't know,
money, yeah.
I was like, I had some money, and I was like, okay. So I just started buying used screen printing equipment while I was still in high school and then the year out of high school. And then that was the main thing I was like, okay, I don't have any money. I started with $500. So I had to figure out what to do. So I printed, I can even show you in the archive room later. I have a room back here that I have all the films from everyone. I printed all original standard, S&M, TNT, MCS, Hammer, Bully. You just go through it, everyone's stuff I printed. So I'd have to print their stuff, take the profit, buy UGP stuff, then sell that. And then finally, and that's what I meant by the longest path to profitability, because it was just, but honestly, I didn't have any clue that it could be done differently. So it really wasn't that bad.
Yeah. I think that's the beauty of business. Like, before we were starting this podcast, we kind of talked about it, but like, business is such a creative thing, and there's no set path of how you have to do it. So hearing like how you were, using, work from other brands and then funding your own brand and like funneling it back and forth, like that's such a cool like way to get the ball rolling.
I mean, like when you're delusional, it's way easier. Delusional and passionate, it's way easier to go through times that are really difficult because you have no clue they are. Sure. And honestly, UGP, the Shadows, Subrosa, etc. It's always been passion first. So the journey is actually the coolest part of, the profitability. It comes and goes so quickly. Who cares?
Yeah.
It's,
well, I always think, especially like making money and being profitable, like obviously that's a given. You want that to exist, but if you put that over the passion, like it's not going to work.
People get confused on making money and that money is evil. Money is not evil. How you use your money is where you choose to be good or bad.
I agree.
And I believe in business that if you're especially in a community business, it's if you take, you must give, and I think that's an important element. I see that's where I think a lot of the podcasts you hear lately, people that are getting really upset is they're not upset with people having a brand that doesn't necessarily give in the same way you do. It's just people that don't give at all. Yeah. And then take from the future of the lifestyle.
For sure. And I see, across the board, just like in every industry, a lot of that where people talk about all this stuff that they're doing or the community that they're a part of, but they're really not truly giving back. And it's like, it's really tough when you have this facade of like, hey, we're doing good things. Give us more money.
Yeah, we need more. We need more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't
mesh, man.
No, it doesn't mesh. And BMX definitely needs the giving in order to achieve what it wants to be. It doesn't need to be anything, but what it wants to be is important,
100%. So going back to starting with the $500, where'd you come up with that?
That's so funny because I wore, my first job was in the summer of 8th grade, and I was at a place called Warm Beer and Lousy Food, and I was a dishwasher. I wasn't even legally old enough to work, but the guy looked at me and he goes, yeah, you're big enough. So I got the job, and then I was saving to buy a motorcycle, and my mom's like, hell no, you're not getting that. So the money just sat there for a little while from 8th grade till basically 10th grade, and then I was like, you know what? Because I've always really into BMX Action and Freestyle Magazine, and through the magazine, they kind of showed you that you could make anything from nothing.
Sure.
I don't even know if they even understood what they were doing back then, as far as like from
what
the
they were
inspiration.
Creating, yeah.
I mean, even all the first UGP designs were basically, I would take bits and pieces out of the magazine, make a graphic
No
or
way.
something.
Oh,
You know, so a
cool.
lot of the graphics were just stolen from all the different ads. But that's one thing is like whenever you start a company or your art, you always replicate the things you like.
Mhm.
The difference is that you got to learn when to take replication and turn it into originality. And that's usually where most brands or projects fail.
For sure.
You
Yeah,
know?
they start like trying to be somebody instead of being their own thing. Like you can't, like I read a book recently and they were talking about how you can't out Amazon. So when people are like, I want to be Amazon or copy their processes, same thing with art and direction. It's like if you're trying to look at another brand and replicate that and be that, like you'll never be that because they're already that.
Well, think about Amazon. They're by this point, fairly speaking, they might be 20 years into their process. So to copy it, are you going to wait? Might take 20 years to copy it, but it's going to probably take you half that or something.
And by the time you get there, they're going to have reinvented the wheel again.
They're forecasting however many years ahead of time. They're evolving in themselves too.
So crazy.
Yeah, I mean, like so taking like the $500 and then kind of flipping that and kind of going from because it started off first with selling to a store called Spotted Zebra and Unity, and they were alternative stores. This is before Streetwear, before anything, alternative goth kind of darker stores were the stores you could sell. So I would just take down a couple 12 shirts and then I would come back whatever amount of time later.
Were they just putting them like on consignment or something?
Yeah, I just do consignment. I'd sell them to them and I would go to each one. And then when in 1988, my mom drove William Tremble, which actually William's our customer service rep and does sales here still. In 88, 89, they drove us to Louisville, Kentucky for the Grand Nationals.
Whoa.
It's our first really big race, or second big race, you know, and I'd been going there with our first plates and we were so excited. We're like, yeah, you know, and that's when I met like Alan Foster and Brian Foster. And I met Jason Lonergan and I met everyone that basically triggered everything. I met a gentleman by the name of Charlie Danishek. And Charlie Danishek is the one who started DK Stems and DK. So he was just such an awesome person. He taught me about packaging and gave me advice. And he would just, I had to sound insane when calling him. You know what I mean? Because there was zero clue. I was like in 11th grade, 12th grade. And he was so kind to me, and his energy, him and this woman named Alice Bixler were the two people that saw me and said, I'll give you a chance.
That's so cool.
Because most people, especially Alice at the MBL, most of the MBL people really didn't like any of us because they just thought we were crazy and rogue.
Yeah,
and weren't
like
even
these
doing anything that
alternative
crazy.
punk kids in there.
They're like, no. And then finally I learned, man, kill them with kindness. And next thing you know, they all love you. And then they've got my back. And then next thing you know, those state plates helped.
Did you do the Grands plates too?
I did them a bunch.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had definitely had a few Grands plates.
It's funny. I'll show you guys the box. I have a box in the archive room that's probably 2 feet long that used to sit next to our printing press. Every time we print them, we just throw 3, 4, 5 plates in the box. And the box is just every state plate for every rider in the world that's going through a midlife crisis. I have a plate for you.
How did you have the foresight? Like you just took us through the archive room with like the magazines and stuff, and like you're talking about like the screens and all the stuff. You showed some screens from the first Shadow stuff over here. Like how'd you have the foresight to save that stuff?
Willie says that I have a fancy word for hoarding. It's called archiving.
That is a fancy word for it, I guess.
I've always tried not to be too blatantly of a hoarder, but for example, like Kink, Demolition Derby back in the day, they did a couple and they were so much fun. And Alistair Winton was our driver, and Ryan Scher was the driver for Kink. And point being is that we painted the car to look like the beginning of Shadow with like the ski mask. So the head of the headrest of the car, we painted to look like a ski mask. And we painted the whole outside. So then I only kept the headrest, put tape on it, had all the guys sign it, and I still have it in the archive.
Oh, that's cool.
So I always try to keep a piece of the journey, so then later on, you're like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
know?
something to reflect on when you're, down the road 20 years.
And it's cool. Like, I've had this in different spaces over 30 something years, but it's always been air conditioned. I've had like I said, I've got all the films, I've all the art, I've got samples of UGP stuff, I've got samples from every project.
Dang,
That's so cool.
It's pretty exciting.
That's incredible. Where did the name Underground Products come from?
Because back in the day, everything was underground.
Yeah.
So it definitely came from that. It also came from Greg Hill Products,
Oh, yeah.
GHP, and I loved Greg Hill. So GHP became UGP. Not a lot of people even know that, but it's like that was
That's
really
cool.
where that kind of came from. But it really came from Freestyle Magazine and all the music that I listened to, which was all underground music at the time. So it's like that definitely is where it just came from. And the word wasn't overly exploited. As later on, like underground, okay, whatever. You know what I mean? You know, but for the 19 years I did it, it was good.
Heck yeah. So you're talking about going to Grands and printing these number plates and, hanging out with the dude who started DK, which is a legendary brand in of itself. And these people are mentors in your life at this point in time. Like, what are your parents thinking when you're like printing these number plates and t-shirts out in the garage?
They were my parents were freaking cool, man. They're still cool. You know what I mean? They still believe they would drive me everywhere. They would buy me blank t-shirts for Christmas presents.
Heck yeah.
They gave me their entire garage. They gave me their whole entire backyard. Hell, one year, all the original bass crew, Robbie Morales, Brooke Mansbach, like God, Enos Colombo, like 20 people. Jimmy Levan's sister, Jimmy Levan, 21 people stayed at my house at one time. My mom made food for all of them, whatnot. Whoa, wow. Brooks was working on my 1970 VW bus. We were all printing the bass shirts. Honestly, I have a picture of it. I'm pretty positive that Bass and UGP did the first ever in any lifestyle brand, a brand-to-brand collaboration. I'm almost positive no one had ever done a brand-to-brand.
Dang.
And that was 1989, 1990, I think.
Do you still have one of those shirts?
I do not have one of the shirts, but Keith Mulligan, I think uncle does.
That's awesome.
It's like, he said, I have a picture on my phone.
I would love to see that.
It's pretty cool, so it was definitely like an early ideas,
Sure.
It's like, it's interesting too, because you asked about UGP. One of the things that was crazy before the internet, my father and I figured out how to do trademarks ourselves. So we just did a domestic trademark. And with trademarks, all trademarks are done by classes. So one class, like we have class 12, class 25, which is like clothing articles and bicycle parts. So we learned how to do it. And then back then, I remember we used to have to go down to the library and they had a thing called microfiche. So you go get a little disc, you stick it in this little machine with two little knobs, and you turn it, and it would just show you different pages of newspapers or phone books. And we figured out how to do it from that.
No
and then
way.
That's how, even from that standpoint, so I learned about microfiche there. So then basically when I later on, we'll get to it later on, but it's like when I started getting into clothing, and I started having to learn how to like make patterns and grading and getting bolts of fabrics and diamond gradations, shrinkage, all this kind of stuff. I would go to microfiche, figure out where to buy the fabrics down in Miami. I would drive by myself down to Miami and then just go to all these places that no one spoke English. And I was like, damn, I wish I spoke Spanish. It sucks.
Did you end up learning Spanish?
No. I can count to 4.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, you came a long ways being able to, negotiate with people and not know.
Just going to, honestly, that's the one good thing about, again, being delusional is you don't really realize how gnarly something is till you're way too far in it. I have a philosophy that I use. Anything I go into, I oversimplify the process so much that I can see the path. And then by the time I realize there's a lot more steps in it, it's too far to turn around. So then it just got to get done.
I love that approach though.
It's the way I do everything because nothing is daunting. Nothing's scary, quotation marks. Everything's scary, but nothing's scary, and you just go for it.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's a big inhibiting thing for most people when they're getting into starting a business or going after pursuing a passion project is it's easy to sit down, especially in the world we live in now where you can get on Instagram or on the internet and look at somebody's completed project and you're like, oh my gosh, you're looking at creating a website and if you're doing clothing, t-shirts or bikes, sourcing by all the pieces, and it becomes daunting. But if you can just think about it as in a simple way and
step
run,
by step,
yeah,
less is more, and just simplify and break everything down. It's so cool.
It's a thing that I think if people can harness that thought process, it doesn't matter if you're a pro rider or an expert rider. If you can visualize and simplify the steps of it, don't overcomplicate it by getting hurt or what, or how many cranks do I need to do or whatnot. You know what you need to do. You'll do it. So just simplify it, and then it works. It always works.
I love that.
Trust the process and let the process kind of just take itself.
That's the best way to put it, because that is it right there. Just but oversimplifying, I think, is most people are too afraid of first steps. Who gives a fuck? What worst could happen? Fail? Who cares?
Well, how many times did you fumble when you were starting UGP? How many times do you still fumble?
All the time.
You know what I mean? And
nor do I ever think about them.
Yeah. You can't. You just have to learn from it and move on. And
I make mistakes all the time. I hate making mistakes that you so clearly think it's right.
Yep.
And then you're like, damn, that was wrong.
Yep. Yeah, it's perspective giving though, and then like being able to share that with people. And that's kind of what this podcast is about, is showing like, hey dude, like even the people who are the best in their class, like they're still messing up, dude. And in fact, that's why they are where they're at. Like me and my wife were talking about this not too long ago. I was like, isn't it crazy to think that the most successful people in the world by definition are failures? Like, isn't that pretty? Like they have failed so many times that they learned how to not do something the wrong way.
Yeah.
And that's,
I mean, like that's a big thing now, right? Everyone's like, oh, like fail fast. I'm like, well, look, it's still, again, put it in perspective of being a writer. You don't want to fail too much because you're going to be sore as hell and broken bones and whatnot. So you want to fail as little as possible, but it can't be a concern,
100%.
Yeah, that's definitely something. I always talk about being a writer in business and how it's exactly the same.
That's funny because I always relate those two things as well. Like the difference is that you're either hitting the ground or you're losing some money.
Sure, they both hurt.
Yeah, they both hurt. They're so relatable, man. And like I always think about how thankful I am for BMX for that reason, because it translates into the business world so much.
That's the cool thing about BMX and skateboarding. I'm sure other things in the world do this too, but I know these two things. And these two things are creative vehicles that teach you creativity, travel, communication, friends, art,
marketing. They teach
everything.
Teach you how to be an individual. Yeah.
I would have never known. Hell, I convinced my guidance, my high school year, I convinced that I did not need a foreign language in my life. By law, you're supposed to take it. Convinced them I didn't need it. They signed all the paperwork, never took it. Because I never thought I was going to leave Castleberry. I was like, yeah, whatever. I just didn't. My parents weren't poor, but we weren't rich, so the thought of traveling was not really a thing. And then now I'm like, oh my God, my number one thing in life is traveling.
Yeah. You're over there hustling, trying to get the fabrics. You're like, man, I wish I would not have convinced that counselor that I didn't need Spanish.
Man, and I love Latin culture. I love Latin food. I love, if I could just go disappear in South America, I would.
Yeah.
But I'd be terrified without speaking Spanish.
For sure.
Go, man. They have it. They have apps that make
it's not easier than
easy.
So talking about, being in your parents' garage, making the dream come true, where does it go from there?
Well, the 1989, I sold the car that I just got a car. I didn't even use it. I sold it, got some money from graduation, went straight to California because John Paul Rogers was already out there. Chris Muller was out there, a bunch of my buddies. So me, I think William and Chip Riggs, two of my good buddies, I went out and just stayed the whole summer. And then basically through that, I was going to move to California, go to Golden State University right there in Huntington Beach. And then through it all, I was like, you know what, man, I don't really want to live with 10 people. and even then it was really expensive. I was like, look, if I went back to Florida, I could probably get a warehouse. So basically after that trip, through that trip, I rode everything, every amazing, iconic spot, definitely rode it, and it taught me so. And it made me, I got to go to like GT and Auburn and like Freestyle Magazine and like while I was still open and all that stuff. So it was a good experience. It gave me the confidence, I think, to come back to Florida, get a warehouse and just start going for it. So that actually took almost 2 years. 1992 is by the time we got a warehouse for the first time.
Heck yeah. Was it here?
It was actually right on Bennett, like 1 mile from here.
That's cool. Is the building still there?
Yeah,
the
still there.
One?
Yeah,
Wow.
it's like it's like one of them like row warehouse. It was like a 1,000 square foot warehouse, with the bay door in front and one door in the front kind of vibe, which are all over the place. It was, but that was the first warehouse. Was 92.
Wow.
It's funny because if I would have understood, because back then you had to have a business card, you had to have an office, that was business.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I would have understood that you could rent a farm or some land and have like a huge compound. But that wasn't, if I started from scratch, I would buy land and I'd say, fuck everyone and just do all my shit and do that there. I didn't understand that. Even back then, I didn't realize you could live in your building. And I'm like, rent was $150 a month. So it was nothing here, So I was like, cool, I'll live. But I could have saved $150 plus.
Put that in.
How many t-shirts is that, It's like,
right. Yeah, exactly. So 1989, we went out there, did that, came back, ended up buying more equipment because I still didn't really have a dryer, like a conveyor belt dryer and all this. So I finally started getting all that stuff. By probably probably sometime in 91, I had everything fully running. I was printing for a lot of bands. I was doing a lot of bands, I would do a lot of like bands would come into town and run out of merch. I would do it. Or even at that point, S&M was doing their clinics. I forget what it was called, Born to Ride tour. I think it was 1990 to 92, somewhere in there. And I would print all their shirts and ship them to each location as they're driving across America. And like we do a lot of graphics too. Like then we actually did, Sean Garrett designed it and I helped him with it, but we did the bondage girl for S&M, that full shirt and stuff like that. Cool. And we did all that art and did all that original stuff. So we did a lot of that stuff. So that was between 91 and 92.
Were you doing UGP stuff still solo when you were getting the warehouse and all that in 92?
That was all just... Yeah, I mean, honestly, up until 92, it was straight me. And then I hired a guy named Ken Thomas. My sister Courtney, she actually works there too. She does all our finance. Was employee 1. And then Ken Thomas was a screen printer that I knew from hanging out downtown and stuff. And he actually came in and started printing t-shirts with me and stuff like that, which was cool. Then we slowly took over, because I had a place called Chad Screen Print. This guy was awesome, man. He totally taught me how to print on plastic. Really difficult printing on plastics. And he taught me everything. He did all my printing for a while. Then I took it over and then just brought it in his house. And so we did banners and stickers and number plates and open and close signs, whatever. You know, if you'd pay me to print it, I would figure out how to do it.
Sure. You know? Well, it's cool too to hear that he kind of took you under his wing and like, you know, another one of those mentors for you. Like early on, it sounds like you were able to like approach these people and like figure out that they were going to help you in your network.
And I don't know if I consciously did it, because I don't believe it was ever a conscious thought, but I'm glad I was aware that these people had something that they were willing to share with me. Mm-hmm. And that was obviously, because I was like, okay, let's keep, and all these people I'm speaking of, all completely different types of people too, you know, but they definitely, and I've always been really conscious when people I remembered the people that helped me through those major milestones, you know.
Take notice of what you're doing and kind of just like pull you a little closer. And like, you know, I always say too, I'm like, real recognizes real. So like when people see that you're out there hustling and they've been through it themselves, they're like, well, cool, dude. Like, let me lend a hand because I know where you're at and it's a hard spot to be in.
And I take a lot of enjoyment when I've been able to help friends or new people. Certainly. And then you see them doing well later on. Like, hell yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, to be like, not necessarily like, again, in one of those conscious things of saying like, I want to be a part of your journey, but knowing that you are able to like lend a hand in those tough moments, that's a special thing
Even
to
if it's
do.
Small or big, it's pretty cool.
Totally.
You know?
So you talked a little bit about being out in California and looking at going to university out there. Did you come back and go to school, or was that totally off your radar?
No, I tried to do a couple graphics classes, but I just kept traveling, and I was like, I'm not into this, man. And once I started traveling, 92 was the first time I ever went overseas. In 92, I got to do all the British Championship number plates and race jerseys. They look so cool, man. You got to see these. They're white with purple and yellow, and they look awesome. And that's when I met right before them. I met Dylan Clayton, Dr. Smooth, awesome racer, super rad. Neil Wood. We had Dale Holmes, Rob Gentry, Chico Hook. All the original race trail guys, you know, Keith
like
Dooley,
right
Keith
there.
Dooley, like you start going through all these dudes from 92. So 92 is the first time I ever went to England, going overseas. And I mean, it was wild.
Probably a pretty eye-opening experience to see what's possible.
It was so cool, man. I remember getting there and I get there early in the one night. And I'm like so stoked. I'm so jet lagged. Didn't even understand how that felt. And I get there and all the guys the night before British Champion all did ecstasy and they're all partying like crazy. And I'm so jet lagged. I'm just like, you guys are crazy. And I just remember being like, holy shit. That's England, man.
Yeah.
You know,
they just go for it, man. It's different.
Oh, it was, especially back then, that early 90s England style was freaking
Yeah, because that was like just like punk rock music and people just getting loose, man. And
it was awesome.
So what did you come back with, like a newfound energy after that trip, like fired up to just keep pushing?
I think the gate was definitely open of like, oh, okay, this is not, let's back up and say, I was like, your BMX bike, your first BMX bike is your first taste of freedom, right? So then from that, my bike, my mom thought I was in my neighborhood. I was all the way 15, 20 miles away visiting Willie, riding all the way back. But it went from your neighborhood to the city, to the town, to the state, to a country. Next thing you know, you're going everywhere, and you're like, holy shit, that just happened.
All this from a little kid's bike.
I've probably been to Japan 9 times, probably been to Taiwan 50 or 60 times, been to Europe, don't even know how many, 20 something times maybe, you know. When you start thinking of, I think I've been to, I forget what I think it was like 40 something states already, you know, that I've actually hung out in. If I just drove to it, I don't count it.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm like,
whoa.
So that kind of stuff's kind of cool. You
Yeah.
know? It's like, you know, that's the dividends, you know, that's getting paid the dividends, getting to travel and do all that stuff. So I always tell everyone, like, but being a pro, one of the things to think about is an older gentleman taught me this one time. It's like, when you're young, you have lots of time and not a lot of money. When you're old, you have very little time and lots more money. So while you're young and being a rider, utilize the time, effort, and the lack of need of money and just go everywhere for free or cheap.
Jump on every opportunity.
After 92, when I started getting the bugs, I would just start going to Europe, and I would bring I remember one time I bring a big suitcase before they had wheels on suitcase, which is freaking crazy. They ever not had wheels on them, you know, and I would bring the suitcase with filled the t-shirts, and I would just go to all the freestyle events and races and just sell the shirts. And honestly, with plane ticket and 3 weeks of living, it was like $1,300 back then, or $1,500 for like over a month, and I would just go all over Europe.
That's cool.
You know,
and through it, you're like growing the brand too, which is even more cool. I think, you know, again, before we started this podcast, we were talking about like passion projects and like being able to then take your passion and like make a living out of it and get to travel the world. Like, that's a pretty unique thing to get to experience at a young age too.
It's funny too, because be careful having a business with your passion.
Oh yeah,
never turns off, right?
Yeah, that's a slippery slope sometimes, man.
It is. That's one thing I'm really happy, because I mean, I'm, what is 86 till now? What is that?
34 years?
35 years. Yeah. So still stoked.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, so I think from that 91, 92, and then kind of like going to Europe and all that kind of stuff, like, that kind of showed me a lot of what we could do.
Yeah.
You know, and then from that 92 to 97 is when I started really figuring out how to make like clothing, you know, and then that's really what changed.
So what'd that process look like? Like, how did you start diving into like,
I don't even, to be honest, I don't even understand how I figured it out.
Yeah.
I have no idea, man. I mean, just learning about fabrics and seam allowance and dye migrations and shrinkage ratios and putting all this stuff together, and then trying to find a place that you can go buy the fabrics.
I feel like you're talking Spanish to me.
Well, it's all things that I learned by fucking up.
Yeah.
That I'm like, oh shit, don't put that kind of fabric next to that fabric, because it'll bleed into that fabric and then the whole garment's wasted, you know? And, or one fabric might shrink. If you cut it off the bias or on the bias here, it can shrink differently. So part of your clothes could
just
tweak
twist
on you, you know? And then it's funny because we started making jeans early on, and we used to call them 6-packers because they're so baggy that you could fix a 6-pack of beer in all the pockets, you know? So it was like, and those jeans, I have them. They're so big that I swear you could make 2 pairs of jeans with them.
No way.
They're not Jinko big, because Jinko is like the end of the big.
Yeah.
You know, it always is with anything. Once it goes one direction, it always gets
Stops
too skinny or too big, you know? It's like, yeah, so looking back on all that stuff.
That's crazy. I mean, and it's always so crazy to me too, thinking about it now, like, because it's pretty easy to get on the internet and figure out like, okay, how do I figure out, you know, everything that you just rattled off? Like, you can find that stuff you can go on YouTube and just search it. But like,
love YouTube.
Yeah, dude, it's the best tool ever. It has like mitigated the need for university at all. Oh, you know, unless you're going to be a doctor or something, like, you can learn it all on YouTube, and that's beautiful. But back in your day, you're talking about going to the library and searching it up, man. And like, that's bizarre to think about.
I mean, it's even crazy when you said that. I remember I go to different libraries in every state I go to, and I would just go in and just walk down line. Just, if a spine looked cool in a book, I'd grab it, open up Xerox any cool pictures. I would just do that nonstop while I'm traveling. And I still remember when Google came out, and I was like, oh my God, you can get all these images.
This is like the library,
there.
but on a computer.
I'm like, oh my. It's still not as cool of what you find. I don't know if the library is super cool because of the hunt, or because some of the content is still not on the internet. You know? So it's still cool.
I think there's also something beautiful about having like something tangible in your hands. Like when you're holding it and like seeing it on the paper and feeling it, like you don't get that same experience. And like the sights and the smells, like all of that. And like the hunt, I'm sure is like a huge thing. Like,
I mean, the hunt is still my favorite aspect of almost everything.
Yeah.
A spot, any photo, all of that.
You stumble upon something, you're like, oh my gosh, this is it, you know? And like, yeah, you can't, that's the problem I think with the internet. As great as it is, like you can just type in a few words and like it's so smart that it's going to pull up exactly what you want.
Now we got ChatGPT.
I know, I was just going to say ChatGPT.
That's a crazy.
I've been showing him, I'm like, dude, it's mad. It's so crazy, like how good it is.
Think about that thing in 20 years from now.
Oh yeah.
The good thing is ChatGPT and AI like that is not going to kill us in our lifetime.
Yep.
It'll be probably after our lifetimes that starts killing people.
Yeah,
for sure. But yeah, I mean, when you talk about it like in 20 years, like right now, it's like, I keep saying, I'm like, it's the best personal assistant you could ever want. Cause like you can run something through there and you're like, okay, this is pretty decent. And I can kind of start molding it around. And like, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, you didn't have that.
No.
And it's like, it's a good sounding board for certain things. But yeah, I just go back to that era that we're talking about. It's like so bizarre to like figure out how to do certain things. And really you almost needed those mentors, right? To be like, here's the door, let me open it for you and like show you what's inside, because otherwise you're digging through texts trying to find like what the heck is going on. So.
I mean, it's funny as you're speaking, I'm like, man, I don't know how we figured shit out, to be honest. I mean, it was a lot of physically getting up and going either locally or someplace and just asking people, how do you do this? Because I don't see how.
Totally.
Don't even know how I figured it out.
It's funny. Me and my wife were just talking about this like last week. We had like ordered a pizza and I was like, how crazy is it to think like back in the day, like the pizza dude just like knew the streets and knew where to go. It's just the same kind of thing where he's looking at a map and he's like, cool, this is where I'm going. Like this block, And
that is one thing I'll tell you right now. I do not miss having a paper map in my car, man. I'll give up running water in my house before I give up maps.
Yeah, that is probably one of the best luxuries that we have, dude. Like not having to like pull out a paper map. I remember like
how
being
dangerous
a kid.
it was, man.
Yeah, the big
the
road,
Atlas.
the Atlas, man.
I still remember we were in Southside Chicago going to the CFBS contest. It was like 2:00 in the morning. Before cell phones, there's a payphone right there. I remember there's nothing, and all of a sudden we're there, and this cop pulls up, and he's like, what the hell are you boys doing here right now? And we thought we were like, he was going to give it to us. He's like, look, get in your car, follow me. And he drove us out and took us to where we were going. It's literally the only time a police officer's ever done something for me like that.
Yeah.
And then come to find out years later, Southside Chicago is the gnarliest motherfucking thing ever.
He's like, you guys are, like, you have leave. No idea.
It's like, get out of here.
That's crazy. Yeah. It's funny how it's progressed. Man.
Yeah.
But so going back to the UGP stuff, it's like, what was there a pivotal point for you where you're like, okay, this is going to be something crazy? Or was it, you just had your head down, you're working away?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably different points. Like when we got our first warehouse and I still remember like colleges coming to me, like sorority girls, and I'd print their t-shirts and like, not just the sorority, but the bands. And at that point, there's some small moments like, oh God, this is good. Or even moving into the mid 90s, we're downtown. That's when we did our first Juvee Hall store was there. And it had bars on the windows, push a bell that someone come out and let you into the store. And it was just done differently. But it was then getting to print like all Schwinn stuff, like Schwinn let's print on. That was a big, big deal, But I think a lot of things were like with going and doing trade shows and stuff like early on, we had no clue what to do with trade shows. So we'd go to California and go to ASR, or never did Magic. We did ASR early on in Agenda. We were one of the first ones to go to Agenda. And then Aaron Levon, who started Agenda now, like does network and does that Truff hot sauce. Yep. And that guy's super cool guy. But he, so I think those, as we talk, I'll probably think of more things, but probably the DK thing, the state plate things, those were definitely, I could remember going, okay.
The fueling moments.
I could tell that was right energy. 92 was kind of getting an office and starting screen printing more professionally, And then when we got downtown, it was kind of everything was fully running. We had number plates, pads, we had clothing, we had shin guards, we had and we were printing for all these other people. And then through that process, I always had this funny thing. I regret this. I don't have a lot of regrets, but I decided that if I wasn't printing anymore and I was doing only my own brand, I'd made it. In hindsight, that was the dumbest thing ever. It was a full business that was running. I could have just broke it off and then gone
like
that
rebranded
route.
it to something else or something.
Yeah, I could have absolutely had that keep going while doing UGP, but my brain was not. I was so over dealing with people and their lack of details.
Yeah,
yes.
You know, and I'm like,
especially in a
no.
print shop environment, because people are running in and they generally don't understand what the process is, and they're just like, I want one of these, and you're like, yeah, we don't do that, dude. Do you have art? And they're not bringing you art. Like, it's a headache, I'm sure.
It was hard, you know, and that was cool because mid-90s then we started Sparkies Distribution, and at the time Pete Augustin was living here, which he's one of my idols for street riding, you know, and he's awesome guy. We're really good friends. He just moved to Orlando because his father lived here. So I was actually trying to help him start the first stolen bikes. So I did his logos for him. I did all stuff. I went down south because Fab Weld, which welded like bullies and MCS and whatnot. I went down there and investigated all this to try to figure out like if I could help him make that. And I was doing all the distribution, some printing for Little Devil. And then my friend had a brand called Mankind. It was the first Mankind. It was a streetwear brand. It's an original one because the Mankind now, there's one now too from Germany. He's my really good friend. Christoph Hubert, but at that time, my friend Scott Nelson, he actually went on to start a brand called Mike and getting sued by Nike because it's a Mike inspired brand, you know. But then he went on now to do like Brand Black's all apparel. There's a really cool basketball shoe brand called Brand Black that my friend Billy Dill and Scott Nelson was the apparel designer for him. So in the mid-90s, we started as Sparks Distribution with UGP, Little Devil, Mankind, and Stolen Bikes. And then that was kind of like our beginning. It was basically probably the first rider-owned distribution company that was freestyle only, because everything before that was, let me back up. We called it Sparkies because at the time, we thought it'd be funny that everyone had to call. They'd have to say, like, Sparky, like, I want to talk to Sparky, because everything was custom cycles, system cycles, service cycles. That was all the names of the distribution company. So we thought it'd be funny.
Like create a fake persona almost.
Yeah, because we'd buy like mechanics jerseys and put like fake names on it with UGP and whatnot. It was just that whole awesome 90s vibe, you know? So it was just, there was no wrong, right? You just do it and you did it.
Well, I like too, like giving that brand like a personality as opposed to like all the other stuff that was existing. It was kind of just like almost like a corporate feel to it because they had more corporate names and like making it seem like it was somebody's thing named Sparky. Like,
and it's cool that
funny.
Sparkies, you know, it has many different meanings, you know, and I love all the different meanings. I embrace all of them, you know, but I do like the name Sparkies. It's fun. It's goofy. It doesn't take itself too serious. You know?
Now knowing that story, like it's always been one that stood out to me. And like, I think I never knew why, but I would assume it's because it's something so different like that. So that's kind of cool to hear that backstory.
So that was mid-90s. So when that kind of kicked in, and we've never looked at Sparky's distribution, used the word distribution because it's a word that clearly states that you're logistics and you're selling it. But we've always joked and called it an opportunity center because it's really a way that we can have a base that we can have all our friends do different projects or different ways to it. And we can change things in and out as we go. And then that's always been the base of Sparkies, you know.
That's awesome.
Which is it's interesting.
So you mentioned like you felt like you had made it when you weren't doing like the print shop stuff anymore. So did you fully like get rid of doing stuff for other people and you just went full in on your own product line?
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
Basically got rid of everything. Then we moved. It's funny that I don't even remember half these times. I'm terrible at timing or anything, but I think by 95 to 90, maybe 97, 98, we moved to Winter Park, which is in between downtown and Longwood. And then that was where we had no more printing and we were only doing UGP, you know, at the time. And then actually Sparkies by that point was actually, we were distributing Federal bikes when it first came out. So we were the first distributor in America for Federal. Cool. And we did something else. We did 20 bikes, which was from France, which is Alex Barrett, Alex is one of the most amazing characters you ever meet. He's actually the personal filmer now for Steve Van Doren and all them. So you see him all the time with, you know, that whole group and stuff. But yeah, so he did a brand called 20 and we distributed that too because he's a good friend of mine, you know, from way back.
Dang, dude.
You know, so that was kind of the beginning of the next phase of Sparkies. And then UGP at the time had full clothing. And when we leave, you can see I have a bunch of catalogs underneath this little bookcase out here you can see. But you can see, like, I mean, we made everything from, at that point, we had underwear, jeans, shoes, hats, girls' clothing. I mean, we had all kinds of
product
stuff.
line. Yeah, I remember when I was like first getting into BMX, like seeing the whole product lines and like how crazy that was.
It's pretty wild to think that we even pulled all that off.
Yeah, it's a lot of SKUs, man.
Yeah, I remember you guys had some cool products then. And
It's intense thinking how, like MOQs back then, minimum order quantities, were so big, and we could never make money. It was just so hard because I kept having to buy so much inventory.
Yeah.
You know,
did you fully disband printing? Like you weren't even printing your own stuff? Were you outsourcing it all entirely?
To be quite honest, the printing thing, I just got so sick and tired of everyone had to hire in printing.
Yeah.
And people be smoking weed and printing and forgetting all the shit. And I smoke weed, you know what I mean? But I'm like, hey, there's time and place for everything, you know?
Get your work done, then go have fun.
Yeah, you know? So I'm like, so after a while, I was like, you know what, man, if I just send it to someplace else and they mess up, it's on them. It's not on me. And that was a big, I would have looked at that differently now. And I would have looked at it more from a standpoint of how do I manage this better?
Yep.
But that's a mind with more experiences built in versus then. For
sure. Yeah. So that's a big perspective thing. Like I feel like at that time you didn't have that like higher perspective looking down and being like, oh, maybe like it's me that's not managing this correct. You know, like it's hard to point the finger at yourself and like be accountable to that sometimes.
As being in this game for as long, I constantly start there first. I look at myself. I love it and I hate it, but I'm a both sides of the coin person. I look at both sides. I try to analyze how it affects each person. And that's sometimes I wish I could just be like, fuck the other person, you know, but it's not how I look at things. I'm very much like, okay, how is this? It's a lot more in depth in thinking and it's exhausting, but it's the right way to think.
Yeah. And I think that builds strong teams. I mean, we'll get into that a little bit later, but you know, talking about, you said some of the people that have been here with you have been here since almost day one. And like, that's crazy to think about, you know, that's a long time for people to stay at one job. And like, that obviously says something about the environment that they're in.
I mean, it's not a perfect environment. It is BMX. Everyone deserves way more freaking money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it's like, I mean, like a Greg Lanthorn, you know, I mean, he's phenomenal. He was world number 3 in racing. I met him when I was 14 years old. He was the first time I ever went to the BMX track. I remember standing at the bottom of the gate as the evening races. I remember sitting there looking at the gate. That's all the pros. They're all lined up. And back then, everyone wore shirts that were cut open, you know, on both sides. It's like that. And this one dude was just talking mad shit. And I'm just like a little kid. I'm like, what the hell? He goes down the gate, rips down the gate. Something goes wrong and he wrecks on the cement gate, slides down it, bleeding everywhere. He's talking mad shit. It was Greg.
That's awesome.
So then Greg was our local pro. So then he was coming to our trails, which were called Brookside at the time. It was actually In BMX Action and a few magazines. Our trails so he would start coming there. And then through that, he was the first pro I sponsored at the 87 Worlds, which is here in Orlando. And it's cool at the time, but it was before I actually figured out screen printing. So I'd go buy I'd buy these little plastic trays that slide into a garbage bag to keep the garbage bag open. It was a thin plastic black, and I'd buy contact paper. I had stencils. I cut all the contact paper out, make the number plate, put stencil paper, different colors, whatnot. And I went to the 87 Worlds and basically started putting them on people's bikes. Whoa. I made stickers that I Xeroxed. Contact paper, put Xerox, then put contact clear over it. And you can still, like Todd Lyons, I see he had some pictures. I went into the pits, didn't tell anyone. And I put UGP stickers on all the pros number plates on all of it. And Todd Lyons has a couple pictures, like blasting, especially. He was so fun to watch race.
So animated.
Dude, and just like, I love like Dave Clymer and Todd Lyons. I loved watching because A, they could jump. B, you never knew if they're going to explode. And dude, they'd haul ass and I love when things aren't perfect.
Yeah, it's just raw.
You know, like when something's too perfect, it kind of takes part of its soul away, I think.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look replicatable. I can't be a certain rider if they're so perfect. You're like, I can never be that. And with Dave Clymer and with Todd Lyons, they were those dudes.
Yeah, it's almost more approachable that way. You're like, oh wow, I see how you did that. I could maybe do that.
Well, it was cool back then because like Lauren Cunningham, he was on Schwinn back then. Todd Lyons, I think, was on CW at the time, and Dave Clymer was still on Pedal Power, or I forget what it's called. I just remember his uniforms were white, black, and purple. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. But those guys just had such cool energy back then, you know? And it's like the whole punk rock thing, it was still uniform based. Everything was still kind of this sterile environment from the fathers basically running the sport.
Yeah.
You know?
But they had those personalities that came in and kind of started shaking that stuff up.
It made it fun, man. It made it a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I still remember in 1989 or 90, the king of dirt was in this backyard. Like Spike Jones was there, Pete Augustin, Todd Lyons, and we all stayed on 13th Street in Huntington Beach at the first. It's called the Huntington Beach Pros House. It was the first real
HB
rider.
house.
Yeah, it was the first rider house on 13th Street. And I remember the day after, or that night coming back, I remember Todd laid on the couch and we're all just such dickheads. We took every single thing in the house and put it on top of him. It must have been 4 or 5 feet above him, you know, like all that stuff. And I was like, man, just thinking back to those time periods, it's just, everything was shocking. Everything was new. And all the experiences were just so exciting.
Yeah, it's like such a visceral thing because, like, yeah, you guys were paving the way, really.
I mean, we had no clue what we were doing, but thinking about it, and I was conscious of it because when I have a picture in my house of Chris Muller. When we all first met Chris, he came to the Orlando track, which used to be in Barnett Park, and it was like, it must have been 86 or 88. I'm not sure which one it was, but he stole all the shit from BMX Action, like their test jerseys and satin jackets and all, and he sold it to everyone at the race. So I have a picture with him pulling all the shit out of his bag, and he has a shaved head. He's selling everything. And that was like, when we all became friends, all the crew here became friends with Muller. And then we all kind of like, I consciously always wanted a bike brand. But at the time I was like, I was working with a guy named Steve Agnew. He's a pro for Auburn and Robinson and a few other local guy. And he's helped me learn about geometry and whatnot. But when I met Chris, I was like, I'm just going to do clothing and whatnot. And Chris will do the bike stuff.
Yeah.
And then basically through that, we had such a really good friendship that we helped each other a ton through graphic and co-sponsorships and whatnot, all that kind of stuff.
That's cool that it was like so collaborative in nature then too.
It was cool, especially because there wasn't a lot back then either. And especially there wasn't a lot like him and I.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you guys had to really lean on each other, I'm sure, back then.
And it was cool just from the inspirational aspect, you know, because there still wasn't a ton of rider-owned brands. And basically late 80s, early 90s, the industry completely collapsed. We didn't know how bad it was. On a trip to California that year, I remember we're in the living room and the phone rings. John Paul picks it up, and it's actually BMX Action Freestyle Magazine telling John Paul they're going to close down the magazine.
No way.
So that happened right there. And I remember we would go to like GT and go to these other places. And we'd even go to, God, I forget the name of the distribution company. It's like More Distribution, which that was the first distributor for S&M bikes. And that was the owner, Todd Huffman. He's the guy that just did the Frogtown race. So Todd Huffman put that on. Todd was the one who started Auburn.
Okay.
So I remember we get to go down there and put stickers on bikes and whatnot and just learn, you know, about all this stuff. And yeah, but that was all there was kind of. Might have been Elf, maybe was around, maybe TNT, maybe, you know, a few others, you know, but most brands were gone.
That's
man.
so cool. Yeah, and that's like the area you're saying, you're like coming in, kind of picking up the pieces and like didn't really even understand what was going on. You guys were just like, this looks cool. We want to do this.
It's funny because I was joking about it because I'm like, oh man, this is awesome, man. We just saw an opportunity and slid right in. Actually, we just didn't realize that everyone was leaving. And as we were leaving, the gap opened.
Mm-hmm.
We thought they just weren't paying attention. And we're like, hell yeah,
Look at all these idiots.
They're dumb.
Those guys are looking at you guys like, oh God,
We're
have
out,
fun.
man.
Good luck. So going back to like that mid to late 90s era, you talk about, you know, Sparkies and like having this massive product catalog with UGP. At what point do you start thinking, maybe I want to start my own bike brand?
I mean, it had always been in my mind, you know, but at the time I just didn't. I was so focused on UGP and clothing and streetwear. And, you know, like I was one of the very first skate or BMX brands to cross over into streetwear, even before it was called streetwear.
Yeah.
You know, so I just didn't have the mindset till a little bit later. Yeah, until that early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, I was like, oh, okay, let's think about this.
Start looking to pursue that. And at this time when you're like in the streetwear arena, is this like where you're starting to meet some of the people from like the hundreds and like Rip and Dip? Like you're starting to create these networks.
Well, because even early on, like there was a brand called Pervert, which was arguably the first streetwear brand, or Stussy was probably the first. Mm-hmm. you know, and then Perfect was down in Miami, and he had a store called Animal Farm, which was probably one of the first streetwear stores. So Don from Animal Farm was awesome. And then from Don, it was like, it just kept, I just kept meeting new people, you know, like Evil Manito, which is Ricky Kim, and then Bobby and Ben Hundreds, meeting them. And then Andrew Lee, who did Invisible Man, which went on to do a lot of other things too and stuff. So I just started meeting just a ton of people, especially because of going to ASR. I met so many people too. It was called Action Sports Retailer. It was in San Diego. It was the biggest trade show. You know, it was awesome. So you just meet. And then back then, I sold to Union. I sold to Union New York, Union LA. We sold to, God, I'm having a brain fart. I mean, all the best streetwear stores, UGP was in those stores.
Dang, so
which
crazy.
was really, really, really early on. And at the time then too, I made everything in America. Everything that we made, bags, clothing, jeans, everything's 100% America made till probably the late 90s. You know, once Bill Clinton signed in the World Trade Organization with getting China in it, literally within 2 years or so, we had to move things to Korea at the time.
Yeah, just because it started getting so expensive.
So kind of go back to the streetwear thing. That was a big thing for me. Is like getting in all these really reputable stores and kind of like we even sold to, God, brain fart. I know, I'll remember in a minute, but I mean, the store we got UGP was really, really exciting, and it really opened up a lot of doors for BMX into that space, you know, and that was exciting too, because then we went from ASRs, we did Magics, we did Surf Expos, we did Agenda, we did ISPO in Europe, and did so many trade shows.
And is this around the time that where you start sponsoring athletes outside of BMX, or is this you were already doing that before?
I mean, we were always doing it, always, no matter what. Even when we expand a little bit, we were always BMX first, you know. But then we slowly, it was always musicians. Like the first band I ever hooked up was the Circle Jerks and 7 Seconds. Whoa. Those are the first bands I ever gave clothing. I remember Willie was with me. We went to St. Pete, this place called Janice Landing. It's an awesome outdoor venue. Middle of freaking summer, long sleeve yellow UGP shirt. I remember giving it to Steve Youth and saying, "Hey, dude, from 7 Seconds, here's his shirt." And he put it on and wore it during the whole show. I was like, oh my God.
Just losing
it.
You know?
Dang, dude.
And that was always a cool thing. Is the whole punk rock thing, obviously, is the ethos of how everything started.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's cool too, like hearing the perspective of kind of leading or being around the people that are leading the charge and like adding to that in the streetwear arena before like that was even like a pop culture thing.
I mean, it was just selling clothing. It wasn't called street. It wasn't called anything special. Yeah. It was just, it is what
You're
it was.
You're just making dope shit that you want to wear.
And back then, everyone was way more open-minded. You weren't, I hate classification, even though I'm guilty of doing it also. I hate classification. I don't think it is what it is. It shouldn't have to be defined into a box. And back then, it wasn't. Mm-hmm. It was like everything sold to that one store. And actually, that was one of the cool things that happened through going to ASR. We started selling to Japan. And dude, in the late 90s, man, we were selling so much to Japan that at moments we're like, where the hell is this going? Because I hadn't been to Japan yet, you know? And I was like, where is this going? This can't be real.
Well, and that's when, like, you know, that American culture over there really started catching fire and people were losing their minds over, you know, they're spending thousands of dollars on Levi jeans. And like,
it was so cool because that is even in the beginning stages of like Neighborhood and, like Neighborhood's awesome brand, but all the Japanese Bathing Ape, all these kind of brands that kind of started through that window.
Yep.
And they're the biggest brands.
Yeah, now
still
they
today,
are. Yeah, they're the biggest ones.
And there's like so many. But yeah, the Japanese thing was that's probably another point kind of going back when we're like, okay,
yeah,
this is cool.
Yeah, like whoa. And were you like doing like the similar numbers to what you were selling in the States? Like, was it starting to catch up to that number?
It was bigger. I can't remember the reality of how it was. Sure. I don't even remember, but man, it was a lot. Like that's 10,000, 20,000 units or something, you know, over a period of time. It was serious. It was cool.
Especially at that period of time when like you weren't posting, like nobody knew on Instagram that like UGP existed.
It was all word of mouth.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was 100% word of mouth, and just the whole networking, like, and being back at the trade shows back then, dude, I remember there'd just be Asian people assuming they were Japanese. We had no idea, they're walking around and we're like, they come in your booth and you're just like, yeah,
here we go.
Let's do
We're
this.
going to sell some stuff.
It's like.
At what point did you go over there for the first time to Japan? Was it during your UGP era?
It was actually, it wasn't till I was 26 years old. I was just about to buy my first house, and Mino and Mongo fly over from Japan. We go stay at my buddy Jay Harvey's house. He's a phenomenal guy. He's awesome. Get to meet him. You'll meet him this weekend. He's rad as hell. They come and stay at the house, and I was in between moving out with Pete Augustin and Kip Williams. I was living with them. I moved into Jay's house for a couple of weeks just by chance, and all that was going on. And Mino and Mongo came into town, and Mongo owned a store called Sperm in Fukuoka. And I've become friends through riding and going to different CFB events and when he'd come over. So Mino, I'd never met him before, but come to find out, he was a low-level Yakuza at the time.
Whoa.
And so if anyone don't know what Yakuza is the Japanese mafia. And so through that trip, we showed them the best time. It was just because of perfect time. We showed them the best time. At the end of the trip, Mino's like, I'm going to buy you a ticket. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Whatever amount of time it was, a couple weeks, a month, 2, whatever it was, ticket comes in, I go to Japan.
Whoa.
And that was my first trip to Japan, which was insane because I get there, we go to Fukuoka for a contest down in, Fukuoka's on the beach, it's a really cool city. It is cool. Mino's or Mongo's store, you go inside it and he has a full live alligator in the store.
Oh my
in Japan.
gosh.
I was like, holy shit. Like, it was, fast forward hanging out that contest, I'll tell like a funny story how like that whole Yakuza thing we go out one night and we go with Mino, Mongo didn't go, and we're cruising in, we're coming out of this party and we're pretty drunk and we're pulling out his parking garage, and Mino barely bumps into the car in front of me or in front of us. All of a sudden that guy jumps out, and then Mino's girlfriend's in the front seat. He jumps out, and this is the 90s, so he has like a wife beater, a super long ponytail, full 90s style, All of a sudden, we're sitting in the back seat, me and Jared Fox in the back seat, and we're like, all of a sudden, slams this dude against the car. We're like, his girlfriend starts crying. She doesn't speak any English. We're like, holy shit,
You're sitting there like, what is happening?
All of a sudden, right across the street's the police station. The police come running out. They grab him by his ponytail and his legs are carrying. We're looking in the window of the police station because it looked medieval, the way to say. We're looking in the window, and all of a sudden we see him throw him into the place. Swear to God. Oh, back up a second. When the cops came out, Mino pushed the police too. I'm like, you can't do this in America, man. You
like,
get your ass
this
whooped.
This isn't good.
What am I watching here?
15 minutes later, the guy comes out, gets in the car. He's obviously a little shook up. He wouldn't take us back to the hotel, so he brought us back to his house. I'm like, cool. I'm whooped, pass out. Next morning, wake up. They woke up before us. He bought us a shirt, underwear, and a toothbrush. Out of respect, this shirt must have been a youth small, man. I put it on, did not put the underwear on, used a toothbrush. I'm like trying to be like polite. We're like, okay, next time we get in his car, we start driving. We're going to all these like super tight roads. He stops at this like old arc door, wooden door. All of a sudden he opens with the left side. He goes in, he pulls an envelope out that's big, comes and sticks in his girlfriend's purse and drives off. I'm like, the dude's running errands for the Yakuza while we're in the back of his car. And I'm like, oh my God. Well, the funny thing was we come back years later for the UGP tour, and MX International Rhea is the most amazing lady ever. She freaking rules. She flew over the entire UGP team for 21 days. We did the south to the north of Japan. She paid for everything. I believe it cost $75,000. We had 2 vans, an RV rig, all this kind of stuff. Well, we run into Mino and we go to him. And now he's moved up in Yakuza. And now he has brothels called Juliet's Premium Lip Cafe, and he has brothels all over this area of Japan. Just weird how shit just, I did not go there, just for clear.
Yeah. But you like start to learn more about people that like you're hanging out with, and you're just like, whoa, dude.
Point of it is like, yes, when we went to Japan, I'm like, dude, I have so many life stories that I'm downplaying this story a shit ton, like the stories are, it would have never happened if you played baseball or soccer or any of that stuff. Those are great. I love all those sports, but I mean, it would not happen.
Yeah, it's totally different. Yeah, the the things, the people, the places that you find yourself in through these type of sports, like it's pretty bizarre, you know,
I
like the
love
stories you hear from people, the stuff you get to experience, you're just like, yeah. So, I mean, sometimes like when I'm hanging out with people who aren't in like the bike world or skate world or whatever, and I'm like telling stories, I'm like, these people are looking at me like I'm full of shit right now. And I'm like, I've experienced this firsthand. I was there and I'm telling you, and you're just looking at me like, cool, bro, that you sound like you just watched a movie. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're like, no, dude, it's real.
It is the truth. And everyone in BMX has that story. Everyone has that story.
For sure.
You know, and it's like, it's just so cool.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like a big part of like in that late 90s, early 2000s going to Japan. And that's really when it started kind of the Japanese next level of everything was kind of going on, which was really cool to see all that happen and unfold while we're going over there.
Heck yeah.
That was a big portion of kind of like that, probably more early 2000s. And that was a big portion for UGP.
Yeah. Well, I love that like you're at this point now getting to go out and experience the world, see where you're selling product to, and like you're being immersed in these different cultures. And then you get to bring that back into the brand that you're creating and like then continue to create based off of this inspiration that you're finding like all over the world.
It fully works that way too, right? You
Yeah.
can see the graphics through each trip,
full
each
circle.
way. Yeah, you see it evolving and doing.
Yeah, you start getting out of your little bubble, you know, and you get to see like the bigger picture of things. And like that's a unique place to stand and kind of look around and say, okay, like what can I create for these people now?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. I mean, I just love creating anything, you know, so it was cool with UGP because it was like so many experiences that I would have never had. I would never learned it.
Yeah.
If it wasn't due to the fact of just going for it, you know.
For sure. So as we're moving towards the shadow stuff, like what really started spurring you into like, I want to create this component brand?
Well, it's funny because of UGP, like I was sitting there and Shadow, I had the name Shadow Conspiracy. I was like, okay, I really like this name. Well, I was doing UGP, and at the time, it was 2002 is when we started Shadow. So about 2 years before that, I started kind of thinking I wanted to do something else too. You know, not get rid of UGP, but just do something else. So I started researching, and at the time, I was really into shoes. I still really am into shoes. So through UGP, I kind of learned a bit. So then basically I was like, look, I'm either going to start a shoe brand or a parts company. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went to China and I just went to all kinds of shoe factories and I just learned how to make shoes.
Whoa.
So I completely know how to do all parts of shoes. But through that process, I realized I don't want to do shoes because the amount of shoe sizes, colors, everything into
a lot
it.
of SKUs, man.
The cash flow on it. And so then I started thinking about things like, well, man, I already have this big dealer base for selling stuff to bike shops. I was like, man,
through Sparkies, correct?
Through Sparkies.
Yeah.
I was like, oops. I go doing a parts company made more sense.
Yeah.
And then that's when I started kind of going down the path of figuring out how to do that.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier is like looking at that path of least resistance almost. And like you looked at, I have this base already. That's super cool. And like,
I mean, thank God, because I still was in the mindset because I can, I should.
Yeah.
Not the opposite of just because I can, doesn't mean I should, you know?
For sure.
So I still was in that mindset, but the mindset was a lot clearer than it was in the past.
Heck yeah. Well, and then you have all these relationships already and like experience sourcing products. So you probably were able to just like plug and play that with
it was
sourcing
completely
product.
new. It was definitely new. We in Taiwan at the time for UGP, we made some pad sets, and I made the Foster Brothers number plate that we did. It was a 3D injection molded number plate, and I made that in Taiwan. But I never ever. Oh, and I made the UGP Kung Fu grip, which was hands down the worst grip ever made in the world, ever. I have one. I'll show it to you.
You still have a pair of
I
those
have one
kicking around?
pair. They were so bad. And honestly, we designed them.
Did they
all
just
in,
like fall apart? Or?
No, they were. The grip area was so thin, and we tried to do a camouflage pattern. Literally, I think the flange is thicker than the body of the grip.
So it just feels like you're on raw bar almost.
And just horrible. They must have, like, what's a grip now? Like 140 to 170 millimeters wide. These might have been 90. Or something, It's like barely your hand fit on it, and they were so uncomfortable. But I made those there, and we made the number plate there, and we made some pads and things like that. But until I decided to do Shadow, then I had to learn everything.
Heck yeah.
You know.
So what's that process look like when you start committing to, I want to start Shadow?
Well, I really wanted Shadow to be American made. So I was like, okay, how do I do this? So I kind of went into it with two thoughts. I took one product, which was a grip. And I go, look, I'm going to send this design over to Taiwan and see what the full cost. And then I found a grip manufacturer called Hunt Wild. I think they're the oldest grip manufacturer even today in America. They're actually near Tampa.
Huh.
So, and I don't know if the numbers are exactly correct now because it's 21 years ago, but it's like, I did all the math. I was like, oh my God, like a mold back then might have been 20 grand. And a mold now in Taiwan could be for a grip could be $8 grand or something, you know? So at the time it was 20 grand versus $1,500. And it was like call it 50 cents a grip to $1 something in America. And you couldn't get the right rubbers. I started looking, I was like, you know what, man, it's night and day. It's either A, I can do this brand, or I'm going to do one product and be bankrupt in a sense, you know? So that's when I decided I was going to go Shadow with a parts company and go Taiwan.
Yeah.
You know?
And so did you start like seeking out partners overseas? Did you travel over there to start finding
I've told
those
the story
people?
a few times, but it was a pretty wild scene, man. I flew to Taiwan, went to Japan. From Japan, I went over to Taiwan by myself. And basically, I knew a guy named Tony from Trade Winds, I think it was called. And he had a store for a streetwear clothing store. And he had nothing about bikes. But I was like, hey, man, I have an address he was in Taipei. And all the factories are in Taichung, which is about a 3-hour drive from Taipei. So I convinced him to drive me down. But before that, when I went over, my ex washed my passport and I made it from America to Japan, Japan to Taiwan. I show up to my first time ever in Taiwan. I might know 2.5 people in the whole country, maybe, barely knew them. And I show up, I hand the guy my passport, and the guy gave me a funny look, and all of a sudden he calls this guy over with like 1 trillion medals on his uniform, and he looks at me and he starts speaking Mandarin, and also the only word I understood was anthrax, and he dropped my passport on the ground. I literally in my life have never been like a cartoon. Whoa. And I started shaking, and I swear my whole body was shaking, and my brain was like, fuck this country. I want to get the fuck out of here. Fuck all this. Oh. A couple minutes later, he lets me in, and I go, and this is after 9/11, right? Because it was 2002. So it's right in that. So it was in that whole window.
Yeah.
So it was scary.
It was a very interesting time for sure.
It was scary, but that was in that airport at the time. The airport now is nice, but it looked like an old prison. Like all the walls were like with cinder blocks white and all the exposed, very sterile, whatnot. And then when I went in and we met with my friend Tony, go down south and just started meeting people, and then it was a slow process, but I'm a firm believer that if you're going to design something, you must learn the manufacturing process first. So, because honestly, so many design cues can come out of process. And honestly, I love designing with limitations, maybe mold cost or whatnot, because I believe creativity becomes a way more powerful through that process versus saying, do anything you want. You're like, well, what the fuck am I going to do?
Yeah. Weird. I don't know where to start.
Yeah. Your process is more refined. And
is that something you learned through like the screen printing stuff? I
believe so. It definitely wasn't a first thought thing. It was definitely a learned thing for sure. Like, okay, if I learn how to make something, I can learn how to design something.
Like what the parameters are that you get to play within.
So that had to be 2000 or 2001. And then basically when we finally started, okay, we're doing this. I got the factories. It's funny because we designed all the first Shadow products in Illustrator. We didn't have any type of SolidWorks or anything. So we drew everything in Illustrator. And then basically we decided that at the Roots Jam in April, Easter week in 2002, we were going to launch the brand. So basically what I did was in the middle of the night, I didn't even tell any of my buddies or anything. I went out on all the ramps and I spray painted "The Shadow is Upon You" and put it all over the place. And in the middle of the night, so people came in and graffiti.
And it was like the same as this guy over here, right? Is that the same art that you were
Those are the stickers right there.
Yeah.
Those are the stickers we put in all the bags and then put them. Then what I did, the old school 1907 trick, I went into the pits when all the pros left their bikes at nighttime. I put shadow stickers on everyone's bottom brackets.
Man.
I put it in a place that wasn't
thing?
visible and they probably wouldn't see it for a couple days, and then just did it as a joke. And then we had these little postcards that we stuck in the bags. That's the same trip too, that basically it was Alistair, Byron Anderson, Ryan Scher, and Joe Simon. That was the initial crew. And we had a little RV. And basically, I want to say like 3 or 4. I think Alistair might have been the last person left to pick. And we basically pulled him into the RV, said, hey, this is what we're doing. And now everyone knew we were going to do this. We said, hey, this is how we're going to do it. And we all went into it. And then basically from that point, I'll show you the box too. I have it here, but so basically what I did then was I have all these Xerox pieces of paper that were crazy, like an old man with like crazy faces and weird like shadows upon you, we're coming to get you, and weird sayings. And the only thing consistent on any of them was a small crow head on each piece of paper. I think I did it for 4 to 6 months. And basically what I do is I take that envelope, put it in. I do a return address from, say, Georgia, ship them to my friend in San Francisco, and I get San Francisco return address stamps on it. And I would do that every month with a different return address and a return thing and send it out to these 40 dealers nonstop.
They had no idea where it was coming from.
Keith Gower from like Pennsylvania, he's a Bethlehem old school trail rider and whatnot. I remember he was so scared that he thought someone was like hunting him and like stalking him. He didn't know what was going on. So we did this for like 4 to 6 months, never told anyone what was going on. The cool thing about it was the first real use of like viral and guerrilla marketing. But the main thing too is it bought me time while I was getting everything figured out.
Yeah.
So basically I used this to kind of buy time. So then a month or so before the trade show, I hand screen printed these boxes with crow heads all over it. Had one label, said Shadow Conspiracy, and had like 1 of 40 written on it. You open up, there's red paper. I personally hand sewed all these little shadow puppets. And it came with a flashlight and an instruction manual, because the first page was what everyone thought it was, what video game, a band, everything. And then basically go through it. It showed you how to make shadows with shadow puppet, and then basically just said, to find out what this is, come to this booth at Interbike. So you had to come to the booth to actually see the collection.
Damn.
And the cool thing about that was then is most brands, when they started, you only start with one product and only one product. So one of my big objectives was I wanted a full collection to launch Shadow with. So we didn't have the chain. We had the chain on year 2, which we'll talk about that too, but it took a little while to get that developed, but we were on that. But then we had grips, seats, stems, sprockets, clothing, and knee pads.
Dang.
So that was our first launch. So, I mean, the whole idea of it too was really cool because we wanted a name that, again, like the Sparkies name,
Yeah.
we wanted a name that was just, we knew everyone would call it Shadow, but we knew through trademarking, I have to call it the Shadow Conspiracy in order to have, and I'm always big on UGP stuff was all very political minded and positive thinking. So Shadow was just a derivative of that kind of mindset of this like secretive. And I'm a huge fan of Alfred Hitchcock because he could show the knife, he'll show the blood, he'll never show the stabbing.
Totally.
So the idea is that you create what the brand is. The brand doesn't necessarily
You give somebody the pieces to assemble themselves and kind
that's
of like
Shadow.
tell their own story.
Really cool.
Yeah.
So that was always a big thing for us. So kind of like having this brand with a completely different vibe and look. And then through this, I don't know exactly what stage it was, but then after we launched, everyone knew who it was. We ended up meeting up with one of my good friends is Chase Hefner. His parents are actually one of the founding families of Full Sail School Media. I don't know if you guys know Full Sail or not. It's the biggest digital media school in the country or world.
Wow.
So by that connection and that friendship, we got access to all the best equipment, boom cameras, boom mics. So we came up with this idea to make a movie that came in X amount of parts. I think it was 4 or 5 parts with a final. And the idea is how the Shadow Conspiracy came together. And it was the conspiracy, and the conspiracy went around and kidnapped all the shadows to make this new brand. They brainwashed them into making this brand. So when you, like on that wall right there, you can see all the pictures, but each guy got ethered and like beat the hell out and thrown in like trunks and whatnot. And dude, the quality of the film is so awesome. But the idea was doing something, because everything was so DIY before that we really wanted to do something that was just so love or hate.
Yeah.
We wanted to
Very
do something
polarizing.
very polarizing. We wanted to be like, because either way, you're emotional. And if you're emotional, you're going to talk about it.
Yep.
And that's what we wanted, you know.
Where were you coming up with the ideas for like all this like guerrilla marketing approach? Like,
I don't know. I mean,
so
I can
crazy
still
to me.
remember, you know, we would talk daily with each of the original Shadow team, and we'd all talk. And all of them are really creative guys. You know, I mean, that's how Ryan Scher and I end up doing, him being on Shadow is what made us start Subrosa. But a big part is his creativity. And he did one of the first Shadow designs, which was a star. And I remember he did it in like Corel Draw or something, you know, and I was like, that's dope as hell. And that's how I was like, okay, he's got this. And Joe was early on videographer, phenomenal videographer, you know. And so the whole team was, we would just talk. It's funny because initially the brand was going to be called Los Legion, which is a terrible name, you know, like, you know,
it doesn't carry the same weight.
No. And the cool thing about the Shadow Conspiracy is we knew it could be called Shadow.
Yeah.
And that sounded cool. And we liked the idea that you could be a shadow.
Yeah.
You know, and that was a kind of a cool way.
Well, the
of
way it
being
was
a part of
launched
something.
too, with that whole like you had the brand name and then everything that was derived from it before it was even launched was very shadowy and like conspiracy themed and like,
And that's one
unique.
thing, even today, when I talk about Shadow, is Shadow has a very definitive look and vibe. It is how it looks, but within the brand, we're very conscious of how each one of our riders has a completely different vibe. And we like to embrace that vibe and showcase it while holding on to the definitive look.
Yep.
And that's something that's really important for Shadow, is going from like a Jerice to a Matt Ray to a Simone to a Jiri to, you know, like a Ryan Scher and Alistair Witten. They all had,
they're all so unique in their own way.
and that all started because we were the first brand to do art-driven seats in all of cycling. Before that, seats were fabric and a logo, and that's it. So us coming out, being in the shoes and whatnot, all our first seats were like, Ryan had a Dunk camo, orange camo Dunk one, you know, and we did, John Jennings had a elephant concrete print Jordan style. And this is all 17 years ago or something, you know what I mean?
And were you incorporating what you had learned through like shoes
100%
to the seats?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's what made me see the seat in that way. And in fact, I was so into skateboarding. I was like, man, why is there nothing on a bike that you can showcase art?
Yeah.
You know, and there was, and then two, seats were maybe $25 retail. They're like $45 retail now. So my thought was, oh, that's a seat. You could change it just because you want to change it because it's $25. It says t-shirt price. I was like, okay, this is a cool thing to do because it can just evolve.
Yeah.
I mean, the number one seat maker in Taiwan basically credits us for changing the seat process.
That's super cool.
But again, it's that art-driven aspect, that aspect of like, hey, man, how can you do something that creates a vibe while still, because I'm a firm believer in design or even a rider. I hate when people flip-flop by the flavor of the month.
Yep.
You know, I mean, you've probably heard me talk about before is that if I'm a different person 20 years, I failed. If I'm the same person 20 years, I'm failed. It's all about consistent evolution while still holding on to the core values of what you are.
Yeah. You have to know what the core ethos is.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of grow from there. And I love that was like the idea from the beginning of the Shadow brand.
It's always been there.
Pretty insane. Even just like the colors, right? Like you talked about like having the red paper in there and like the fact that you guys had the foresight from the beginning to say like, we're going to create a strong brand and we're going to be unwavering in everything we do. And like, then you say, you know, you have the riders that get to take the brand and then put their own spin on it, but it still comes back to like everything is a derivative.
Difficult. It's really, really, really difficult. And look at most brands and look over 20 years and watch the brand.
Mm-hmm. It evolves and
it's like a windy road.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Kind of ping-ponging back and forth. And like, you see that kind of in all industries, right? Like people are kind of chasing the money and they're going after what colors are hot now or like what style is hot now, as opposed to kind of leading the charge and saying like, well, we're going to dictate what that is. And I think that's, in my opinion, a much better way to approach the problem.
It's way harder from a design standpoint. It is very, very difficult when you set parameters. You're like, okay, but in time, it's not even a thought process. It's just part of the action of. But I think you could like from a rider standpoint, you go to the guy that just constantly is like one up in or switching the tricks every single event to match what's hot for that. And that's like, come on, man, like be Mike Aiken and just make the most basic tricks look phenomenal, and you're like, that's
when you look at like somebody like an Aiken, he was coming into those contests. Like I always think about that Dew Tour he won in Salt Lake, and like you watch everybody else and they were doing pretty much the same style of runs, and like he was dropping in and being so unique, and like still today that would probably win a contest because he was dropping in and everything was executed at the highest level, but it was different than everybody else.
I mean, Mikey, I still call him Mikey, which is hilarious, but Mikey and Matt Behringer went to, I think, all but one Roots Jam. And they would show up, and even Mikey at the second Roots Jam, he was on Bully. And I have a picture hanging up on I think it's on my refrigerator at home, but Mikey's just launching this box jump. I mean, he is way too high considering where everyone else was hitting at. And I still think about those two guys. Like they're so special in my memory bank that because I always see them rolling up to Roots Jam. And I've known Mikey for so long that it's cool seeing him who he is now, and the fact that how he is like a shadow in a sense that he was like, this is how I ride. It evolved and it got better and better, but it always stayed consistent with what he felt was the correct way of presenting himself.
Yeah, he was never going out and learning something because he felt obligated to. He just operated as an extension of himself. And I think, that from like a personal standpoint over to a business standpoint, if that's what you choose to do, I think it's so important to have that like sense of pride and like know what that ethos is for yourself, because if you don't know, you can get lost pretty easily and like you sway because you're trying to impress other people or to make the money.
Especially like you're growing up, and I always joke about like, your friends don't buy shit. So be careful about their influence on what you're doing in design. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean don't listen to it. But like you're saying, like it could be really easy that you're going this route and it has nothing to do with the objective you set from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, it might not even be like a representative of you, especially if you're just like kind of following the path that your friends are going down or whoever it is, it's like that becomes a slippery slope.
It does. And really, it really will end up stripping every ounce of love you have for whatever it is that you're doing if you're just bouncing.
Yeah.
But it's quite difficult to be like, okay, I want it to be this.
Yeah. The awareness is hard, man. And yeah, I think that's like what this episode we kind of started off saying is like, you got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And like put one foot in front of the other and figure out like who you want to be and how you want to represent, and that's the steps in the right direction. So starting the Shadow brand, like were you funding it through UGP or did you take a loan out? Like
actually it was at that time it was my father was also my partner too. My dad was awesome. He was always right there with me before he passed away 12 years ago. But he basically, I think we saved up, I think $30,000, and that, going from $5,000 or $500 to $30,000.
Yeah.
But $30,000 was all the trademarking, first inventory, like, website, whatnot, all that kind of stuff, all the travel, everything in it, I think is what it was.
Wow.
But yeah, that was crazy because that was all we had.
Yeah. Just gambled it all, right? Not necessarily a gamble.
That was a lot less of a gamble than when I started Rocksteady, which is our trading company. And that was literally a double down. And I never do that. I'm very conservative. I double down. If that would have failed, I would have lost everything I own.
Wow.
And that was scary. That was scary, scary, scary. Especially starting a company in a foreign country. But we'll talk more about that as we get to that point. But
For sure.
That was scary. But like with the Shadows, it was kind of cool just because we already had UGP. UGP was a really well-known brand. We already had, by that point, 2 years later, I sold UGP. So 2002, we started Shadow. It was going 2 years later, 2004, I was approached by an overseas manufacturing company, and they wanted to buy the brand. So I told them no at first, like, no, I don't want to do it. No, I'm not interested. And then the guy kept coming back, and then I was like, well, let me think about it. So I made a pros and cons list, and the list was really funny. It was funny.
Do you still have that list?
No, but I know a couple things that were on it that I find very funny that I love bringing up. Not in a podcast, I'm not gonna bring it up, but it's, but it's funny looking back to it. But it's, so I did pros and cons list, and really, like we were talking about earlier, it just got to the point that there was no way with a clothing brand that we could afford to actually sponsor riders, do all this stuff, and compete against. It was Split back then, Fox, Fresh Jive, 661. There's so many brands that we just couldn't compete.
And
I was
those
losing.
guys had the pocketbooks, the deep pockets, man.
Lost Taj to Fox, lost Brian Foster to Fox, lost Joey Garcia to Fox, got him back for a little bit. It's on. And I was stoked for the guys. I was like, hell yeah, man.
Yeah, it's hard to
Make
be
some
upset
money,
at your friends when they're
It's-
getting paid, you know.
There was no ill will at all. It was more like on, damn it, man, what am I gonna do? This just keeps happening.
Yeah.
So on the pros and cons list, basically, and a little bit of studying, I realized that when you sell a business, it goes two ways. And it went the way that I assumed it would, which was it's not going to work.
Yeah.
You know, because within a very short amount of time, I just saw the misdirection, misleadership, and like the lack of consciousness of what the objective was. And at that time, I was like 2 years into Shadow. We didn't sell UGP for life-changing money. It was enough to get like buy this warehouse, pay off all our debt, a little bit of money in the bank account, but it wasn't like
I
fucking
don't ever
money.
have to work again.
No, not even close, especially for taxes, man. They take all half of it, you know?
That shit's crazy.
So it didn't really put us in that position. So I had no choice to make Shadow to work. And now the pressure came really on because I'm like, oh my God, it's only 2 years old. It wasn't making enough money to support the 6 people or whatever it was that worked at Sparkies, you know? So it was a little scary, but honestly, like that fuel and that I don't call it anger, but that anger.
Yeah. Well, when your back's up against the wall, you have no choice but to come out swinging.
I mean,
right?
like I was talking about earlier, the t-shirt designs from that first collection after selling, they're the gnarliest designs. Like there's that one that we did, a stripper woman that had no skin and she was totally naked. And she was a full print on front and she had like a garter belt with dollar bills coming out. So the idea was the inner stripping off your skin and blah, 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 but throwing it as like a stripper thing. But then we had like skeletons cutting your head off on your shirts and like it was just like blood. I mean, it was crazy.
Yeah.
Like the shirts were cool as hell. Like,
and like we were saying earlier, like I love how that's such a time capsule of the period of time that you were going through, and you're just like, well, I just sold this thing that was my baby, and like you could probably see the downturn it was starting to take almost immediately.
it was bad. It was pretty. It was within months. And honestly, I wish I was the kind of person that could milk it.
Yeah.
I'm just not that person. I can't do anything for money. I love money and I'll make money, but I can't do it for money.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there going, man, if I quit this, I was getting a paycheck. I was going to get commissions. I was going to go like, this is going to be awesome, you know? But then I was like, I don't want to do this, man. This is not me.
So you stayed on like working for the brand for a little bit?
That was the deal. Like
Yeah.
I was actually going to get commissions and paychecks and get full control of graphic
kind of
design.
just stay on as like founder or something. Was that kind of like the role?
I didn't know if they even had the word founder at that time, you know, kind of thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's what it was, you know. And then I was like, nah, I don't want to do this. So I dipped, and then that was it. So that was 2004.
Wow. Was that a hard thing to like step away from it fully and just be like, well, there goes because you poured your heart and soul into something like that. So
I mean, thank God I had Sparkies and I had Shadow. So it didn't make it easy, but definitely made it like, okay.
yeah, almost more of like a distraction at that point.
And
in
I
time 'cause
knew
you're
through
so
the
busy.
study, and I was like, oh man, this could go wrong. Okay, what does wrong look like? Okay, this is what could happen.
Dang.
You know, but it was gnarly. But ultimately, I'm so happy that happened because we wouldn't have started Subrosa, we wouldn't have started Rant, we wouldn't have done all these other things that we've done if it wasn't for that happening.
Heck yeah, man.
You know,
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, it panned out in such a positive way. Like the fact that you were able to buy the building that you guys are still in today. And like, yeah, that takes a lot off the table too, I'm sure. Like the stress of like, can we afford rent somewhere? You know, like worst case scenario, like you've got a building that you're in. That's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, and it's something I'll have for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
You
Sure.
know, so it's definitely cool from that standpoint. But yeah, it was exciting, difficult, kind of transition from UGP, full on Shadow. The idea of Shadow was just so exciting at that time because that's right when Byron Anderson, because Byron was one of the first pro riders, and then Byron from almost like year 2 or whatever, Byron's wickedly smart and he can fix and make anything, like build a ramp, do a house, take a house completely apart, put it back together. So then he basically went to school. Now he has a master's degree in mechanical engineering. Whoa. He does all our SolidWorks drawing. So he learned SolidWorks, did all that stuff. But the point is that when he came up with the idea for the Shadow interlock chain, that's essentially our hero product. That's what pretty much set Shadow differently than than 95% of the other brands,
Sure.
out there. And that gave us, because I firmly believe as a component or bike brand, you got to have something you bring to the table.
Yeah, like your bread and
something
butter.
innovative from a function standpoint, but also innovation is from a style standpoint too. And I do believe that the both have to be balanced, because too much innovation, pretty boring. Too much vibe, not very technically going to make you a better rider or a great experience. So the balance of the two is really important.
So what did the development of that chain look like? Because I'm sure that was a lot.
Hard.
Yeah, because there was nothing at all on the market at the time like
and
that.
The hard thing about the chain is it's not just make the chain. Okay, one thing with great design is when you go, that's obvious. Anything that's great design, you should be able to look at it and go, why didn't I think of that? Yeah.
Yep.
So with the chain, it was obvious. But when Byron came up with that, because this is right when Josh Hino just had his first We the People frame. And it was one of the first ones that had like a micro gearing rear end. It was like a new thing. And then with the normal chains, you couldn't get with the 9.2 driver, it was breaking the chains, and you couldn't get your chains adjusted right to get that really
because you'd always have
slammed.
that like 1/4 inch off of spacing or a 1/2 inch. It was
so when
always
Byron
weird.
came up with the ideas, we realized that from a grinding standpoint, the plates don't fully pull off, and the adjustability. And then actually through studying, we found tensile strength was, figuratively speaking, double of a chain at the time.
Whoa.
So we're like, okay, cool. This makes sense. But then going to the factories, I think we went to three or four factories, from the largest factory out there to small one, and they all said no. They said there's no reason for this. And one of the big things we realized is that they didn't want to do it because there's so much behind the scenes with the molds in the machines. And these machines are insane looking to make chains. They're huge, huge. So no one wanted to do it till this one factory, which is still our factory and still the only factory that makes only our chain, makes no one else's chains, So we've been with them now for whatever it's been, 17 years or something.
Well, that's crazy to think that chain has been around for that long now.
Sold millions.
That's bizarre.
I mean? Like, who knows how many we've really sold, but it's been a ton, I mean, it's...
So did they have to create tooling?
Yeah.
Whoa.
But it took a lot of convincing. And then it was really hard through the process because the pins had to be completely redone because of the pressure it puts with popping links out.
Mm-hmm.
And just going through the whole thing was just so intense. And then we got that done. And then we launched it. And it was right when Josh's bike kind of just came out. Micro gearing just came, but we launched it. The first didn't have a little cutout in it. So they didn't fit that well on 9.2s. So we had to redesign it immediately with the arc cut in it. And then it totally worked awesome.
Whoa.
But then later on, we end up releasing because basically we tried to get we had a patent almost in our hand, we're like, oh, this is awesome. But then the patent agency found a patent, I don't remember when, maybe late 1800s, early 1900s, whatever, I don't know, 1800s, whatever it was. And it was for a Japanese farm equipment that they used a halfling chain on it. And I was like, man, what the fuckers? I thought it had to be applicable to the process that you use it.
Yeah.
It wasn't it. So we couldn't trademark or patent it.
Dang.
But it gave us because the difficulties, and it took probably 3 to 5 years probably before the other chain factories said, oh, those dudes that came by. And then they made the chains, which there's 2 factories now make chains for almost everyone else. And they're not very good, So it's like, that definitely helped buy us time to get our chain out there.
Yeah.
But then that's why we decided to make this the Shadow Supreme chain. Because we're like, look, it's jewelry on
that
your bike,
thing's so beautiful, man.
The tensile strength is fucking insane. It's the only forged plate chain in existence that I know of. I mean, the strength, that's why I like, look, let's make a chain. I don't care how much it costs. Basically, I want to prove that we make the best chains in the market. So let's make this chain, even when we don't sell that many of them, let's make this chain just to prove that what we do is the best. And that's why we did that. That's why it has a lifetime warranty, all that kind of stuff. And it's just, but that was a whole nother insane process, trying to convince the forging process into the links and trying to make it work with the machines. And it was really difficult, but it definitely proved proof of concept. That's where I was looking for,
How are typical chain links made?
I mean, in the same machines, but the typical ones is they're all, how do you even say it? Like, what do you mean by made?
Like it's so the one that you're talking about forging,
Yeah.
like this heavy duty chain, but like how are the links normally made? They're not forged. Are
They're
they
stamped.
They're stamped. Okay.
Yeah, they're stamped. Yeah, typically stamped. All chains are
All
stamped.
chains, yeah.
Even the interlock V2, which is it's still called the V2 because it was the one with the arc was the V2.
Yeah.
You know, so so that's stamped. But with the heat treatment, the right amount of heat treatments, you know, and things like that. It's funny because people are like, oh, halfling chains are going to stretch. Well, the plates don't technically stretch. Typically what happens in a chain is the hole to the pin starts
like wallow
ovalizing.
out.
Yeah. So the ovalization is usually the part that starts going bad.
Yeah.
You know,
And that's why you guys kind of beef up that. That makes a lot of sense. Huh.
You know, so yeah, that was cool because then that basically put shadow on a between the vibe, which would be seats, and the marketing, and then the technical aspects of the chains really put it on a different path.
Just backed it all up.
Yeah.
What year did the chain come out officially?
I would say 2003 or 2004, but I don't know. I know Byron had the idea for launch, but it just took so long to get the factory to do it that it took a minute, but I really don't know. Maybe
That's
2003,
crazy.
maybe, or
It's crazy. It's been on the
4.
market for that long now
Yeah.
too, and it's still like tried and true, and it's still backs itself up.
it's the one thing, man. Like, you know, we say like in racing, because we make a race halfling chain, and we're like, dude, races are won by drivetrains.
Mhm.
Save weight everywhere else. Don't eat a hamburger that day. Don't have a belt buckle on. You'll save the same amount of grams.
Yeah.
You know, of that. Like, dude, chains, when a chain breaks, we've all done that.
Ugh.
That is a horrible experience. Like, gee, honestly, even if you don't get hurt, you're mentally done. You're
Yeah.
leaving. You're leaving wherever you are that day.
Your knee's still going in the step.
Yeah. Thank God back then, you know, we had stim pads, you know?
Dude, that is the worst feeling on earth.
It's done.
Yeah.
Done. You know, that skin is on your shin or your knee. It's just,
Well, not even just like
It's-
breaking chains, like talking about tensile strength. Like if you want to put power to the ground, like you're losing it if you don't have, if it's
Yeah.
twice the tensile strength, like now you're putting that much more power into the ground.
and it's BMX. The whole idea of BMX is the pedal.
Mhm.
Pedaling to me is one of the coolest things in BMX because
Yeah.
like a good rider, like a Brian Foster or even Mike Aiken, they can pedal so good and haul ass and it looks good. You see someone that never raced and they pedal, it's just
Chopping
choppy.
wood.
Yeah, you know, and just weird.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, man,
I was
it's-
just talking about this with a buddy the other day. He was like asking me how I like pedal so smooth because I grew up racing too. And I was like, dude, I remember having to run steps, like just one step the whole time. And like that's still so ingrained in me today. And it's so funny because you do watch people who grew up like just riding the skate park or riding the street and like the way they chop the wood, you know, and it's like, it's just funny, man, the difference in styles.
It's just so funny because like it's like I love BMX because I love pedaling. I like we say the best way to see a city is to pedal through a city. It is the
100%.
coolest thing, and that pedaling action just feels phenomenal.
Yeah.
You know, and then if you can throw action into the pedal,
Yep.
like that's even cooler. You know,
For
It's
sure.
like it's, you know, but yeah, I love like the idea of design, function, you know, and having a product in our collection that actually, it's kind of like with Subrosa inventing the street rail.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we didn't invent legs coming apart. We definitely invented it come apart in the middle. And like that project was so gnarly, which I know we'll talk about Subrosa, but that project was like so crazy because we had to start with dimensional weight, which is your height, width, length, and shipping companies
Yep.
equate that to a cost.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how much something weighs. It's all about dimensional weight.
So we knew from day one when we went in that dimensional weight because we had two objectives. We wanted people, we want to be able to ship the product to people, but we wanted people to be able to put it in their trunk and go the spots with it. So to be able to create the strength ratio to weight and dimensional, it was really, really hard. I'll show you the first rail. Like it's
I'm
the first
excited to
sample looks
see
like
that.
shit.
Yeah.
You
It's
know,
probably
it's-
like pretty cheesy
it's
almost.
really
yeah.
bad. But we made the first sample and it was a square rail too. And then everyone in the whole crew is like, no, round, do round. And I was like, okay, let's do
Back
round.
to the drawing board.
But it was definitely the right decision, you know, and it was cool. But yeah, I like, again, kind of talking about like having limitations or boundaries and being aware of the boundaries because you can make a rail thick, strong, crazy as you want. But dude, if it costs you a couple $100 to ship it, you failed.
Yeah, and
you
also is it
know?
necessary? You know,
Yeah.
like playing with inside of those parameters is so important to know like the variables, right? I also like talking about like driven through the design piece of it, whether it be a product or the packaging. Going back to you talking about like the brand being so recognizable, it's so cool to me that like all of your packaging is on brand. Like the coffin box, like my wife still today, every time I get a new shadow chain, she's like, that box is so, like, she's always like, you guys need to put out a coffee in the coffin box. And I was like, it would be just so cool.
That's our next traction.
It's on,
collaboration.
dude. Yeah, dude, it would be so cool. But like, yeah, it's just so iconic. So like, where did that stuff come from?
The cool thing about the coffin box, we didn't go in and say, let's make coffins. It was like, how do we use the same materials, the same printing process of our packaging now, but make something that's different? And through that, the coffin came up. And then through that, it was like the first packaging I've ever seen, besides like an Apple box, that people actually keep and actually put on their desk. And people still comment about like how cool the coffin box are. And then through the box, it became like an icon for us. You know, we've used it on so many things.
Yeah, because so many other components come in similar style boxes now, correct?
Everything's a coffin in some form.
Yeah.
You know, and then we kind of like, we digressed it to just the silhouette of the coffin, which was kind of cool. And we had cutouts and whatnot, and things like on different products and things like that, which was, but all that packaging concept all came from me meeting Charlie Danishek from DK and him teaching me about packaging. Because even early UGP products, we always did crazy packaging. We did a number plate called the Recession Panel. It was a black and white panel, because number plates at that time were like 09 tech panels, hard flow panels. They're all tech inspired. So we made another plate that was black and white with a bum on it. And then it came in a bag, a brown bag that you couldn't even see the plate, went inside it. And on the bag, it had a garbage can, graffiti kind of style, and it just said Recession Panel. And that's how it came. Or we did another plate that we did that came in an album cover. And we knocked off Beastie Boys' Check Your Head, but it was called Check Your Chain. And the cool thing about it was Eric Hayes, who's one of the very first graffiti artists from the beginning graffiti from New York City. And he may have been the first person to go from graffiti to actually commercial artwork. He did MPMD logo. He did Beastie Boys. He did, he did so many logos. And so he did that album cover. So that album cover looks just like that. So it's us sitting on the stoop, just like Beastie Boys, with all of a sudden you flip it over and all the names of the songs are all ideas about Taj, Jimmy Levan, Robbie Morales, cool. Everyone's in it, and all the photos on the back just like Beastie Boys. You can see Robbie when he's on Velocity, which is his first bike shop sponsor up in the Northeast and stuff like that. So it's kind of cool seeing, and then that number plate came inside it and it was all shrink wrapped and all that kind of stuff. So it was really like a different pack. So that, from meeting Billy Danishek to learning about packaging's always been something, because I believe that everything's about steps in experience. And if the first experience is when you pick it up and you're like, oh, or you see it, you touch it, and then you go inside, the experience has to be every step for the overall experience to feel like something special.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's like there's so many studies about like, you know, you talk about the Apple box, right? Like the psychological effects that box has, and how much emphasis has gone into creating a box that like vacuums when you open it, and like you peel off the screen. Like, you might not consciously notice that, but there's a reason that you love getting a new iPhone.
100%.
You know, and it's the
packaging. A to the Z.
Yeah. And
that's what we talk about, the A to Z's. A to Z's I think about with everything I do, you know, is how does that feel? How's it look? How's the experience with it? And I'm always jealous of the margins they have in computers.
Yeah, for sure.
Because they can make these, that box probably costs $5.
Oh, for sure.
You know what I mean?
The box probably almost costs like a third of the phone, you know, in reality.
You know, but BMX, we don't have margins like that. So
you got to be even a little more creative, man.
It's even way more creative, you know.
And I like talking about that A to Z, because like you're talking about focusing on the intentionality of every movement, every piece of design, like how it all correlates together. And like, I think that again is something that's missed in either people's personal lives or their professional lives, is you're kind of just trying to get to the end as fast as possible. And it's like, you can do that, but you're cutting a lot of corners and you're not developing something that you'll ultimately be proud of, most likely in the end.
And honestly, as a creative type, from a writer to a brand to an art, it's storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't skip from the A all the way to the Z. It's got to be A, B, C, D. Otherwise, the story makes zero sense.
Totally.
You know, and I believe branding, design, music, everything should be an A to a Z. Because it doesn't just typically just stop.
And it's so important to tell those stories in like an eloquent way, or else people get lost.
And sometimes you might not even know what your Z might be in the future, but you got to know that it exists, and you got to know that the steps you're taking still
Building
allow you
building
to
you
go,
to that.
Yeah, that you still have the flexibility.
Yeah. I also love you talking about like the number plates and the album covers and stuff, because we were just across the street at Juvee and you showed us the number plate in the pizza box, and what a nod to that early era, man.
And it was intentional because, I mean, I love racing. We are from racing, and us getting back into racing right now with very particular type things was fun, but it's competition. So it's inherently serious.
Yep.
So we've always I love competition, but I don't take competition seriously. So I like the idea of kind of coming in with something just to bring vibes back.
Bringing a little more fun. One of my favorite shirts ever, and it was a shirt that you guys did. It said "Take fun seriously."
Yeah.
And I still, like, every time I think about that shirt, I'm like, that is like, what a good sentiment that is, because like that's the only thing you really should take seriously.
And honestly, it was a corny saying that was meant to be corny, and it was meant to just take people out of this, I'm so serious.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, just fucking relax. But at the end of the day, we're riding a bike and having good times.
Yeah,
It's
we're riding little kids' toys. Why are you guys so aggro? You
Yeah.
know, like, that's
I
a
did
good
things serious
sentiment.
too, but it's like, hey,
There's a time and a place for serious.
Yeah.
That's so, I love that.
So packaging, I think, is important, and it's in hell. Half the products you might sell don't even go on a shelf, but it's still, when you get in the mail from the mail order, you get it. You're like, oh, that's fucking cool. You know, it's like
thinking about that unboxing experience. And like you said, like saving the boxes. Like I don't think I have another bike part package in my garage, but I have shadow chain boxes in my garage.
Yeah.
They just stick around because they're cool.
It's fun. It's like, it's definitely fun.
Yeah. So what was the progression after starting Shadow to bringing Subrosa into the world?
I mean, us doing the Invisible Man Cruiser in 2006, Subrosa started in 2006. I mean, Ryan and I, seriously, he's one of my best friends, so we're always talking about stuff. And at the time, he's riding for Kink, and he loved riding for Kink, and he had a great relationship with the Kink guys. But we were traveling all over the place. I remember one time we were in LA on a trip, and we were there a day early for whatever reason. We were just hanging out in our motel, not even a hotel, motel, just sitting there drinking, hanging out. And we kept looking at the bike, going, man, what if we could make everything on a bike? It was just such a what if. And we're talking, and we just kind of went into it. And, so Ryan and I just kind of like had an idea with it. I already had the name, and I did the logo and the name. I was kind of sitting on it, and I wasn't sure. And I was trying to like talk to him about like, hey, we should use this name. And we were unsure. We're like, Subrosa. No one used a Latin word before as a name. And we didn't know if people would understand. I think it was too feminine or too foreign, lack of a better way of saying it. What are people going to think? But the cool thing about Subrosa in Latin, it means under the rose. And it meant back in the day that anytime you walked in a room, if there's an upside down rose hanging in the room, it meant the conversation was secret with your group of friends. So the idea is homie-driven groups. Hey, this is our secret. We do this together.
And it relates back to the roots of Shadow.
Of everything.
Wow.
Kind of pulling it in. So again, every name we have has a reason for the name. You know? We're not just doing a name generator and we're like,
this one's cool.
This looks cool.
Yeah.
I mean, again, love it or hate it, here it is. But the Subrosa logos, it's never changed. You know what I mean? It's
I've always enjoyed the logo, but now it makes more sense. I've never looked up where the root of that word came from.
It's cool too. Is it? God, I'm having a brain for it again. Fred Perry, the old like kind of like English. It has like the crest logo, and that's where the crest came from.
Yeah.
And then we did the thorns to look to be a rose thorns. And then kind of having the shield with upside down rose, and then all of it's been the same. And from day one, it's been black and white. It outdoes colors and whatnot, but it's always been black and white base, and logos have been the same. Our logos will never, ever, ever change.
I love that.
They will be these logos till the end.
Did you do the original like Shadow logos? Did
actually,
you do these logos?
Scott Holgren, he went by Angry Swede back in the day. He's actually a guy I met at ASR.
Okay.
Became friends with him. And then one day he did some graphics for UGP. And he just broke his leg. He just told me the other day, he was on Viking and all this crazy shit. I'm like, hey, I need this logo. Here's these parameters. I need it in blank days. Cause we were like, and I was like, I just couldn't figure out what the logo should be. And he came up with the Circle Crow. Me, Yardley, and Evan Parker did the Subrosa logos.
Heck yeah.
And Yardley actually did V&M, which was like a motorcycle brand, a clothing brand, really sick brand. They sold it to Motocross, whatever that place from up the Northwest, the big international motorcycle company. They did that. These guys are awesome at graphic design. So he did an internship with us that year, and he was pretty young at the time. So he helped us with that, which was cool.
That's super rad.
Yeah, but those on the Subrosa ones, I did sketch everything out and kind of like, hey, this is what I want. Obviously, Evan and Yardley
Just refined
way
it
better. It's like for sure.
When I love the fact that you talk about like that those logos haven't changed and they are what they are for the entirety, because they are logos that are timeless, and I think that's another thing we talked about, brands that kind of ping pong around and jump around and they change a lot. And like a lot of brands use fonts that are kind of the flavor of the day or whatever it is. Yeah. And then like you go 10 years later and you're like, okay, well, this isn't relevant anymore. But if you're doing something with that intentionality and you're looking at that A to Z, you're able to say like, this is not just for the flavor of the day. I'm creating a legacy here. And that's like a cool approach, I think, that you guys are
classic is
hitting
key.
Stuff with. Yeah.
With certain elements, because obviously you can have elements like t-shirt designs. You can have certain things that are in, out, but things are longevity. You got to make sure it's classic, otherwise your brand will be dated before you've even gotten to a pinnacle point.
Yeah. Once people start recognizing it, then you've got to change it. And then people don't recognize what you're doing anymore.
And as guys are defined by the clothes that they wear, where like girls can buy clothes based on fashion trends. They can buy things at the cheap knockoffs. Like guys you're defined.
We want to show the logos that we're rocking.
And it defines the group and the people you hang out. So it is really important that, like me as I'm a super fan of the brands that I really like and I'm really into. And if one day they're metal, next day they're hip hop, one day they're this, they can be all of it if that's how they start. But if they're just
jumping
something
around.
I'm like, I don't know who or what you are.
This doesn't make sense.
And it doesn't fit with my homies and blah, blah. So no.
Talking about the brand too, I was talking about this with one of my buddies and he ran a big marketing firm and he was talking about, or advertising firm, and he was talking about they did this study for Budweiser years ago. And part of the study was they did a survey of bars around the United States. And it was when guys would order a Budweiser, they would face it every time. So they would show people what they were drinking and not consciously, but every time somebody would pick that beer up from the bar, they'd face the label out. And so, like you're saying, like guys usually identify with what you're wearing or what you're holding. And so like, yeah, it's just funny to like when you psychologically break that down and you start to understand why like a strong brand is so important.
And I don't know if all guys are, but I'm a creature of habit. Once I like something, I
way.
usually don't veer from it, especially food or beer.
Yep. I am a creature of habit. I'm the same way. I'm like, I wish I could be more adventurous in some aspects like that. But for the most part, I'm like, if it's good, like there's a restaurant we like right down the road from us. And like, it's like 20 minutes, but we'll drive there every day because it's so freaking good. And like,
I eat the same exact food every day. I drink the same exact beer. I kind of look at food and whatnot, kind of like Steve Jobs looked at his shoes, jeans, and shirt.
Yep.
Black shirt, Ashwood jeans, New Balance shoes.
Simplicity,
don't talk about
man.
it. And I'm a big fan of that logic. Like people make fun of me because anywhere I go, if that place has something good on that menu, that's the only thing I'm going to order.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
You know what you like, and you don't have to use that energy to like decipher what you want.
And I'd rather use that energy to decipher on something else that's new and exciting.
Yeah.
It's like food or Miller Lite. I'm like, yes, give me Miller Lite, man.
Well, I love like the fact that you like talk about like Steve Jobs because he was that way with so many things, and like I do believe that's why he was able to create such a unique empire that he
Less
did.
noise.
Yeah, he was able to simplify his life. And like I feel the same way as you. Like my closet is all black. So and when people ask me, I'm like, well, I don't have to stand there and pick what shirt I want to wear.
Well, I always
It
joke,
all matches.
we're all gingers. I'm like, I'm colorful enough already, so I just wear black.
I tell everyone I'm colorblind, so
Smart. You really are.
I really am. But
It's amazing.
Black shirts are awesome. No stains in your pits.
Totally.
Nothing worry about it. It's like
Yeah.
it matches everything.
Throw a little pop of color on the head or on the shoes and you're living, man.
Yes.
So you go from launching Subrosa. Now you kind of have like the whole thing. You're distributing your own stuff. When does Rant come into play?
Rant came in. I don't even know what year Rant came in, but it came in at first because we were like, at first with Subrosa bikes, we never would put a Subrosa logo or a Shadow logo on something that was just generic. We're like, we won't do it. And at first, like no sub logos on the bike. If it's not a Shadow thing or a Subrosa thing, then it's just not going on. But then we realized through studying that the average consumer likes buying bikes with other logos on it. It creates like a sense of like almost like trust.
Legitimacy almost. Yeah.
Look at mountain bikes, look at road bikes, etc. So basically through that, we're like, okay, let's create Rant. So we just quickly did a logo, whatnot. It looked like shit. We launched it, put it on the bikes. It was okay. But then through that, we kind of like, okay, let's actually rethink this, you know? And so basically you're like, it's probably one of the hardest design efforts we've ever done, because how do you promote something that doesn't have a pro team and it's not creating innovation?
Yeah.
So basically what we summed it down to is vibe. So basically, if you look at Rant, you look at the logo, it's actually Richard and Yardley actually designed the Rant logo, because I went to him and said, hey, look, I love the original MTV commercials and how abstract and crazy they were, and stop animations. And I don't know if you guys remember these or not, but they're really cool. So basically through that, I was like, I really like this, and this is why. So basically through that, we decided that we wanted a 90s throwback, because we knew 90s style was coming back. This was before. So we went for 90s, super fun, ultra goofy, and just tried to make it. So Rant is actually the same font as the TV of MTV.
Oh, wow.
And if you look at it, then it says Rant is actually.
That actually makes a lot of sense now.
So, and that's kind of what it came through. So the idea of Rant is just, that's why we say Rant don't care. And it's a funny thing, because it's just like Rant don't care. And that's like Rant saying, and it doesn't mean it doesn't care about its products, because everything Rant makes is custom made. It just, we don't put, there's not a lot in marketing, and there's not a lot in innovation development, because that's Shadow and Subrosa's role.
Yep.
But everything with Rant is really, really good. It's fun. It's like the packaging is like just crazy, you know, and like all the abstract and all like, so basically with Rant, instead of having like a team, we do campaigns. So all the campaigns are like micro campaigns, and they're just weird, wacky shit that just makes it fun. I mean, Rant's killing it right now.
That's sick.
It does really, really
well, it's
good.
cool too that it's a more approachable brand, because you're not carrying all the weight of like a team and those things, and like then you can use that to make like creative, fun campaigns.
And that's kind of the idea with Rant. It's just not taking itself serious. Again, it's that 90s. So all the packaging has like really fun elements, and it's just not serious, but it's all really good. And then we can make products that can be sold aftermarket and then be on the complete bikes, and they're only available on Subrosa bikes, and then sell the parts. And one thing we've learned too is like cars. People will replace their car tires with exactly the same tires that came on. And I started noticing that people do that same thing on bikes. I was like, that's so weird to me, because in my mind, I'm going to go after the new thing.
I want to upgrade.
So the good thing is with Rant is that people have trust, because it already came on a bike, and they can put it back on a bike, or they can just put it on whatever.
Yeah. Well, I feel like too, especially like looking at it from that light, like most people who are getting in the complete bike game, like they're usually younger. So it's like a parent. And like usually if they don't know much about BMX, they're probably just bringing it to the shop, and they're like, put whatever came on this back on this.
That's probably what it is.
Yeah. That's such a like a unique thing to like notice though. That's super cool.
And it's cool now, because Rant now, I mean, yeah, it still works on the complete bikes. It's still a replacement for the complete bikes, but also it's really become a complete brand that's from a fully different angle than a Shadow or Subrosa.
Yeah.
You know, so those are our three brands. They all have some overlap, but they all stand very distinctively they have very different objectives by each brand.
Yeah. Such unique identities as well, which seems like that's like such an important thing to you as well. Like when you're going into creating these projects, even, you know, walking across the street where we just wear a Juvee Hall, like that has its own unique identity, but it's based off of these three brands that you're talking about. So
And it's imperative to have that, you know. And I think with Rant, it's such a fun brand, and Subrosa is so awesome. It has such a Ryan's so good with the Subrosa vibe and how it feels. And then Shadow's a complete, even though they're all brothers, they all feel different, but they all feel similar too.
Yeah, they're very synonymous, but they're individuals at the same time, which is super cool.
I think so, you know. So again, it's kind of now having Shadow riding gear, which is now like its own brand within the brand. It's kind of like Virgin, how Virgin Mobile, Virgin Atlantic.
Yeah.
So we kind of thought about like, hey, we could start a whole new brand, or let's just make it Shadow riding gear, because the trust is already there, but it's a separate entity now. And now the riding gear is its own aspect.
Yeah, I like that you kind of went that direction with it too, because it does usher in like a new avenue for it as well.
I think so, because I mean, no matter what we do, we're never going to make pads and helmets cool, but we can make them cooler.
Yeah.
And that was the main idea. Like even when we went into our Shadow featherweight helmet, it was like, we were kind of like, well, we'll make someone wear a helmet more. Well, like sitting low on your head, important, and weight. At the time, we didn't really know in mold helmets, but we're like, oh my God. Well, then through the helmet, our helmet weighs 12 ounces.
Oh my gosh.
So,
I just saw a post about it the other day, like the weight, it was like a weight post of it. And I was like, whoa. Like,
and that was a really interesting point of how do you market something? How do you market weight virtually?
yeah.
So we had to sit down. We're like, okay, what would make someone understand how?
Like, what is 12?
Everyone
ounces?
knows a 12-ounce cup of water. Everyone knows what that is. Every country knows what it is. And when you put it on, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. So this is how we can sell that. We also kind of went into writing gear with an idea that more people don't want pads than they do want pads. So we make pads for people who don't want pads.
Yeah.
So everything's breathable, super slim, high impact, fits on your pants. It doesn't make you look like a hot dog. You know?
And I can attest to it because those are my favorite pads to ride. Like I used to love G-forms, but they fit so tight and like uncomfortable. And like after I got a pair of your guys' pads, I was like, dude, these are like, they are breathable. They're comfortable. And like, yeah, you're not like puffed up like you're getting ready to go do a quadruple tail whip, you know? Like, yeah, they're comfortable.
And our whole idea is like, no kid wants to be safe, right? So our idea is extend the rides. Idea of like all the great riders from the 90s were still the great riders in the late 2000s because they wore pads.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I mean, there's a reason that Nyquist is still riding at the level that Nyquist is riding at.
Now, granted, our objective wasn't to make gigantic pads like they all, because it's not functional with today's riding style. But now with technologies, like on our super slims, like the types of materials we're using, the absorption and whatnot in the knee pads, and like we have a new series called Vantage Series. And man, it's phenomenal how thin they are and how much impact absorption it has, and
that's cool,
and things like that. So it's exciting learning all that
What's
stuff.
the ETA on those things dropping?
Those are going to drop. We have a full face helmet in mold coming out that weighs 24 ounces. That's all CSC, CE, CPSC, BSI rated, Australia, Europe, and America. And then we have a new lightweight, ultra lightweight glove coming out in the Vantage series. That's probably 8 grams, I think. It's the lightest glove you've ever seen. And our gloves, they fit extremely tight when you put in, and they're by design to do that. Because by this design, you get no wrinkles in your palms. And there's nothing more annoying than wrinkles in your palm.
Especially doing a tabletop or like a no-hander and the gloves ball up in your hand.
And here, you have to wear gloves in Florida, man. You'll sweat. You'll lose grip nonstop.
Blow a hand off.
Know? So yeah, so it was really cool trying to figure out like how to make things breathable and light. But that's all coming out into this year, 2023.
Heck yeah, man. Well, that's exciting.
So that's our whole new element that's coming out, and just, you know. And the cool thing about all that kind of stuff too is they can go race, dirt jumpers, and even mountain bikes, you know, which we love riding mountain bikes. So, and I'm not going to make mountain bike stuff with Subrosa or any of that kind of stuff, but pads, we absolutely can transition.
Which is why it's cool that that's like a separate brand of its own thing, because you can maybe even drop a mountain bike helmet down the road, like especially with the technology you have with such a light helmet. Like I feel like that would be very applicable to that industry. Hell yeah, dude. I want one.
Yeah, I mean, I love mountain biking. It's so much fun, you know.
Dude, it really is.
It's just a nice escape.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's just
that pedaling, man. Yeah. That's all it is. It's nice pedal.
I always say
in the
it's
woods.
Just,
I'm like, yes.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about running into anybody, you know, and you're just like, you're out there with yourself. You know, if you're with your friends, one thing, but like if you're out there pedaling by yourself, that is like blissful.
It's an amazing experience. And we made those Subrosa UTVs, the urban train bikes, and it's like a single speed but not fixed. And I ride that on the weekends like 30 miles, and I'm constantly punching people's windows. I'm constantly just getting like, I'm like, this is bad. I'm gonna get shot.
It's scary,
it's like,
dude.
I just want to go to the woods and just ride as far as I can, and then not have any cars trying to run me over, or how cars driving through the bike lanes. I'm like,
dude, it's terrifying.
Everyone on their phone. It's terrible.
It's scary.
I don't even want to like where our coffee roastery is in Longmont, like is 7 minutes from where I live, and I like don't even want to ride my bike there. And like it's a super bike friendly community, but like it's just I don't know, dude.
One text message away, boom,
Yep,
you know,
all over, man. Well, heck yeah, dude. I mean, as we kind of roll into wrapping this thing up,
Cool.
I have a few more questions.
Yeah, go for it.
And this is kind of going more into just like the BMX industry as a whole. But like, what do you think is something that's kind of the most misunderstood thing in the industry right now? Kind of a loaded question, but
I mean, is there any parameters of like, what do you?
I mean, just like something that you look at where you're like kind of looking around and like, maybe it's a consumer that's misunderstanding something, or from an industry insider, like that's kind of being missed by other people.
That BMX companies actually make a lot of money.
Yeah. I think, that's a
I
great
wish they
valid
did.
point.
Yeah. It's like, that would be awesome.
And that's kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Like, it's such a passion driven thing. And, BMX is that way. And maybe BMX companies can make a lot more money at some point in time. But I think it's on all of us as riders and as people, that are leaders in the industry to kind of step up and say like, hey, we're going to, pay more for products because we know they're good, or whatever that is.
And, from a dealer, a consumer, mailer, it's just support the brands that are really here, because, like, I'm a firm believer that be into the brands you're into and support them. Like we always talk about, like, hey, if you want to get sponsored by a brand, make sure you have some of their stuff on your bike.
Certainly.
Because it instantly shows you do care.
Yep.
And that's a great way to kind of get in with a brand, and it's like
some buy-in,
and just be into a brand because you truly like the brand.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, me personally, everything comes with strings attached. So do you want strings attached to something you don't even really like just to get something cheap or free?
Exactly.
Not me,
And I think,
it's like,
whether you're looking to get sponsored or like you trying to get a dream job or like create a relationship, like I think all of those things are important. Like, get to know somebody, like figure out what makes them tick. Like,
DM a brand.
Yeah.
How you guys doing?
Yeah.
Hey, I bought this and I loved it. Or hey, I had this experience. Or hey, I had something go wrong, but I think I figured out why. Or hey, man, thank you so much. This happened. Like it's. I mean, we have so many super fans that are actually our friends now, just because of them commenting and buying and just being a part of the whole process. And that is the coolest fucking thing ever. Man.
Totally. Yeah, it's
a family at that point.
Yeah. And I'm that person. I'm a fan of shit. You know what I mean? And that stuff I follow and I comment. And
is that a cool feeling for you too? When like, you're obviously looking at brands that you love. And so when that's happening back to you, like something you've created and people are coming to you and they're like, dude, this is like my life. Like, is that what kind of feelings does that
invoke? I'm so
invoke?
conscious of it because I'll DM a band or DM someone that I know is a smaller band. I'm like, man, this is so awesome, blah, blah. And there's no ghost you.
Yeah.
I'm like, fuck you.
That is the worst thing when you like pour your heart out to somebody and you're like actually like trying to give them an accolade and you're stoked about what they're doing and like no response, where it's like, thanks. And you're just like,
but I'm so conscious of all those types of actions in life that I instantly always relate them to us. I'm in a situation that I could be at Target buying something and how the person speaks to me, I'm like, oh, that's good or bad. Or hey, I'm in a store and I see how they decorate something. I'm like, oh, that's
makes
a
you
good
feel
idea.
something.
How does it make you feel? Because at the end of the day, as a consumer, you hold the power to buy anything you want.
Yep.
So why buy anything? Why not buy things that actually embrace who you are, who you want to be?
Totally.
In time.
I love that sentiment. So you've been Shadow's about to be, or is
it's
20
years.
now?
Yeah, it turned 20 last year, but we didn't want to really
blow it out too crazy. Yeah.
It was like,
well, that's a huge feat. Congratulations.
Yeah.
20 years is
everyone's
push.
like, hey, you gonna do anything? Like, no one cares that you turned 20.
Yeah. 25. That's the quarter of a century, man.
You're like, hey, you made it, but really no one cares. But for us, it's kind of cool because
dude, it's badass. 20 years in BMX is so cool.
And the fact that we sold UGP at 19 and now Shadow is 20, I'm like, dude, that's a long time of consistently never leaving BMX.
Yeah, showing up and giving a shit. So like, how do you continue to show up and be inspired and like give 100% every day? Like, what's your method to the madness?
I mean, I'm a super fan.
Yeah.
And surround yourself around people who give a fuck. And that's really what it is. People that'll challenge you, people that like inspire you. And that doesn't mean saying yes to your dumb ideas.
Yeah.
Sometimes it means like, that's a dumb idea. You know what I mean?
For sure.
Like, and you're like, cool, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, inspiration comes from the closest parameter to you, typically first. Then from there, it's through the traveling and then putting yourself in uncomfortable scenarios that your mind opens up in a different way, and now new experiences come in. But your inspiration really is within your neighborhood, you know.
Certainly.
That's where it kind of starts at first.
When I love the fact that you touched on growing through being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because I think that that's something that a lot of people are really scared of. They think if I'm uncomfortable, I'm going to be stuck. I'm going to be, you know, frozen by fear. But it's quite the opposite. When you're uncomfortable, the amount of growth that comes through that is pretty insane.
It's funny when you say that. It's like when I was in high school, I was friends with everyone in school. I knew everyone because we'd gone from elementary school all the way through. But I would be in school and I would not say a word. But through UGP and BMX, I realized that if I want to meet people and if I want to do things, you got to learn how to talk and how to communicate. So really, it's one of the things I feel I'm really good at now is through communication and talking, because that's how you discover cool shit.
Totally.
You know, and now, so it is kind of putting yourself out there, make yourself uncomfortable, because I remember back in the day, like I want to meet like an artist, and I would be like, okay, at the beginning of the internet, and I would know, oh my God, they're going to be there. So I would tie it into a trip, and I would fly there, put myself in that situation so I can meet the person, become friends with the person. So I do believe that you can manifest anything in life. You just have to put yourself in that uncomfortable situation, because it might go wrong.
Yeah.
But fuck it.
Yeah. And I love
it's
it.
wrong for a reason then, and you're supposed to go on to that other path.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And I love that you touch on like the process of like wanting to meet new people and like knowing, like we were talking about this with a friend the other day. He was like complimenting my network, and I was like, dude, I really appreciate that. Like you can do it too. Like all you have to do is exactly what you're saying. Like go out of your way a little bit. Like, is an artist going to be somewhere? Figure out where they're going to be. Who are they friends with? Make friends with them, because they're probably pretty cool too. And like through that, you can get close to the people that you admire and befriend them. And
I mean,
it's really
funny,
cool.
Like, if you guys come to my house, you'll see like on my walls, I have Shepard Ferry artwork. You know who Shepard Ferry is?
Oh,
yeah, I did the Hope poster and whatnot. Back in 1994, I was just cruising down the street in New York City. I went there for a trade show, and I was like really not sure. All of a sudden, I see these guys wheat pasting is really early on, and his buddies were right there, and he was I started talking to him. Next thing you know, him becoming friends with Shepard. This is why he was still in college, and he sent me all signed posters and whatnot. Well, through that, I ended up making all his original giant hats before it was called Obey.
No way.
So I actually made all his hats, made all his stuff. So I have I have the original embroidery from 1995, the schematics with the original first embroidery printout, and I have that framed in my house.
Wow.
I have original posters that he gave me. But again, I went to New York saying, hey, I'm going to go there and learn all this shit.
Yep.
And then through that, I met so many people on that trip. That was insane. And Shepard, we're not best friends, but we know each other.
Yeah.
And I reached out to him, and he actually sent me a bunch of signed books and stuff. And that was
sick.
1995. And, you know, but the cool thing was back then, it was again before the internet, but you just met people that are like-minded. I met these guys on the fucking street.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, he's designing the posters for the president. You know, I'm like, that's
well, and I
pretty
think
cool.
that also has something to do with like the energy you're bringing in. Like if you have genuine intentions, like people can pick that up pretty quick. Whereas if you're like, oh, that's Shepard Ferry and I want to be friends with him because I want to be cool, they're like, dude, I'm just a normal person. Like if you want to be friends with me, you want to be friends with me because I'm just a normal person. Like
I missed those time periods too, because it's like everyone was experimenting. Everything was come from the punk rock DIY kind of ethos, and how that kind of led through everyone just experimenting.
Totally.
And just not, I mean, screen printing is cool, because screen printing is like the cheapest way to launch a new project you want to do. Because I mean, literally you could take the screen off your window and you could make a screen out of it. You know what I mean? You know, and so, but yeah, I don't get how we even went down that path, but
that's super cool, dude. Well, yeah, I've got 3 more questions for you. Perhaps the most impactful of the episode.
Let's hear it.
I don't want to scare you too much. So first one is, if you could go back and give your 18-year-old self any piece of advice, what would it be?
Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I also now would say, especially with technology, make a business plan.
Yes.
Because you can download business plans now, and I was just telling a guy the other day, just make a bulletin point business plan. They could just be bulletin points with some rough numbers, just so you have some form of guidance.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing I try to, even though I've always done forms of, and any business I ever do, it has to succeed at worst case scenario, or I won't do it. you know? So yeah, I would say just because it can doesn't mean you should, and actually create a budget and just look at it every day.
I love that, man. Yeah. Wise words from a man who's done it himself. That's awesome. Learned the hard way, perhaps.
Yeah, so 100%.
Heck yeah, dude. Well, I guess I just have one more at this point in time. But do you have any motivating words for anybody who's looking to pursue business or anything motivating for them that has helped you along the way?
I mean, get off your couch and fucking do it, first off, because you'll never find out if you can, you know, and do things because you love it. Don't do things because you think you're going to get rich, because typically you're not going to make dick for money for a long time. You know, that's one bad thing about the internet and TV. They make it sound like everyone's fucking rich and everyone's making a shit ton of money. And
Or
you're
it's
making
an overnight success.
Yeah, everyone says like 20-year overnight success or
Yeah.
whatever, you know. You're like, oh man, it's just the way media and everything just makes everything look like it's just so obtainable just by
This instant gratification.
Don't start a brand if you want instant gratification. Because you create a product, I forget half the time what product we designed, did, and then we finally get the final sample. It might be a year or two down the line. And sometimes I'll forget, and it'll be like a brand new item. Like, oh my God, I forgot that we even designed that. Here it is. You know, it's like,
dude, that's
so there
crazy.
is very, very little instant gratification. Secondly, is social media makes you feel you have some instant gratification. It's bad affirmation, and you have to take the positive and with the negative. And the two don't work real well together with your mental state. So fuck all that.
I love that, man.
It's like,
That's some profound shit right there.
it sucks. Social media is funny. Back in the day, we used to turn in magazine ads like Ride or different magazine. God, and no offense to them, but we're like, God, I can't wait till we just control this ourselves. What can we do? Be careful what you wish for. Now you're a photographer, a journalist, a videographer, an editor, a social media engagement. That you're like, holy shit.
Yeah, it went from like having to do it with one or two places to like you're having to do all of it in-house by yourself 3 times a day.
If you're lucky.
Yeah, minimum.
More, you know,
Minimum
like,
3.
It's crazy,
you know,
man.
It sucks. I really don't like that at all, but it's the path we have to use.
It's the nature of the beast, man.
I mean, I now put all my social media on my 4th page of my phone, and I still will pick my phone to go look at the weather or do something. And next thing you know, I'm in Instagram.
Yep.
And I didn't even want to be. And I
Yeah.
swiped over.
Next thing you're scrolling for
and I'm
30
in there. I'm like,
minutes.
that's not where I wanted to be. I wanted to be over there, man.
It's interesting how it draws you in, though. You know, it's all by design.
It's addictive.
They thought through their A through Z pretty well.
They did,
Pretty
motherfuckers.
nuts. I know, man. They got us.
I appreciate it in so many ways, but I do miss the anticipation of waiting for something coming in the mail.
Yeah.
Hell, I think that one thing is everyone should mail stuff to people, because no one mails anything to anyone anymore. You know, mail shit to people, make them stoked.
I have
know
a
what
friend
mean?
that
It's
told
like,
me like a long time ago talking about the mail. Like Traction is primarily like e-commerce.
Yep.
And he was always saying like, dude, handwritten letters in the mail are like the most incredible thing. So like every order we get, I still handwrite a note if I'm in town. And like the amount of people who will like send me their fridge with every note that I've written them, I'm like, whoa, dude, like that's so freaking cool. And
we
like,
take it for granted because that used to be normal.
mm-hmm.
It's abnormal now.
Yeah.
Oh, half the people now don't even ship their own stuff. It's just all drop shipped, right?
right.
So they can't.
It's crazy.
I love the idea of everyone that knows me can attest to this. I have the worst handwriting in the world, and I'm a
Same.
terrible speller. So everything's misspelled, can't read it. And I think it's getting worse. I try to write now, and my hand feels like it's
It's all that coffee from across the street, dude.
all zooted out. Man.
But yeah, I mean, I do love that sentiment though. Like, you know, put more stuff in the mail, do more intentionally focused things that show people that like, because it's easy to send a message on Instagram, you know, or it's easy to send a text message. Like pick the phone up and call somebody and check in, or send them a cool letter or a postcard. Because again, that goes back to like, who do you want to stand next to? Who do you want to call a friend? Like if you're doing those things, you're going to show up differently.
Yes, 100%.
There's a story I've told before, and I think you'll probably like this one. But my buddy was trying to get a design job, and he kept applying. And he decided that he was going to send a size 66 Vans shoe into the agency that he was trying to get the job at. And he wrote this like really cool note. And he's like, I just want to get my foot in the door. got a call that same day and got the job the same day that the shoot was delivered. And it's like thinking differently, thinking outside of the box, and like actually being genuine with that intention, as opposed to sending like your resume, you know?
So funny. They're Vapors magazine is from Northern California. For it was like one of the first graffiti streetwear magazines really out, and I became really good friends with Chris Hull and all the guys that ran the magazine. So I used to mail them shit. But one time I mailed them a dried scorpion that was like a foot long. It was huge. And then through them, they started mailing us shit. It was really funny. But then the System Cycles guys, I used to mail them my garbage COD. And they would think I was selling something nice and it'd be garbage. So one time we were fucking with them, and Gio just had his first kid. So we mailed, I love these guys. This was all in fun.
Yeah.
We mailed them a shitty diaper COD. And we put a bikini in a 6-pack of O'Doul's. So they sent us a picture with one of the guys wearing a bikini drinking O'Doul's. It's like a fuck you, Mac, you know? But then they actually funded our first Kung Fu grip. So they used to store them and mail them to us to fuck with us. They would hide burritos and they didn't think we'd take everything out. And then we would take it account. They didn't think we counted. I thought we'd just stick it on the shelf. And then it had the burritos, and we found them all. But it was fun, you know? Granted, it's different what you're saying, but again, it is that idea of just having fun.
Yeah.
That makes things very personal.
Yeah, that's usually mundane, right? Like it's making something fun out of it. And like it's a cool interaction between two brands.
And I still talk to all these guys that worked at DK. This is nearly 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And we still talk about these fun things
That's
that we
so
do.
funny. Yeah, the antics, I feel like, is like such a lost art form. Like that kind of stuff is.
Well, everyone's so soft.
You can't do antics anymore.
Yeah,
Man.
I mean,
Everyone gets so offended.
If somebody in a warehouse opened a box that had a dirty diaper in it, you'd be like, what the fuck?
It's funny too, because I think it was, I could be wrong, I think it was Sweet Lou saw the bikini and the beer, I forgot, that was one thing, and the diaper was another thing. I think Sweet Lou Caparelli was like, I think it was him, was so excited the box came in. I guess he ripped it open and got poop on his hand. He was like, man.
Well, have you seen there's a new business where you can ship a box of shit? It's like elephant shit, and you can ship it from like a return address. Is that what it is?
Yeah. You get a bag of dung on your porch, dude. It's hilarious.
That is so messed up.
Isn't that hilarious?
You can buy anything on the internet.
That's what I'm saying. In fact, last night, the guy we did a podcast with was showing us a freaking laser that you can buy on the internet that will burn a hole through steel. And he's like, yeah, they're only $6,000. Yeah, they're only $6,000 and you can buy this. So I was just like, all right.
You can buy that laser with no permits, but if you want to put a fence up in your yard, you got to get a permit.
Isn't
or
that
whatnot.
crazy?
You're like, what's going on?
If you want to paint your building black.
Yeah, you got to get a permit. Can't do a black. 2 shades less. Yes.
I love it. Man. I love it. Well, dude, I'm so excited for the next couple of days. We're heading to Swamp Fest after this, and it's my first Swamp Fest, so I'm excited to experience it with all of you guys. It's going to be a treat.
Trey's done a really good job at this. I'm really, this year it looks like he really is consciously looking for sessionable objects. The castle being this, dude, the fire on that castle is going to be 300 feet.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's going to be nuts.
It's going to be bizarre. We're trying to do a podcast in the castle tomorrow, actually.
It'd be so good.
Yeah, trying to get maybe Big Boy. I talked to Jabe about doing something up there. So
I went up there on Saturday and helped him work on something. I climbed that castle. It's pretty sturdy.
I bet.
But a couple of the edges, you're like,
oh.
It looks tall. I'm excited to see it in person because it just looks like, I don't know, it's unbelievable.
It's so funny because I didn't realize that Trey was a super fan of Disney. I always thought it was Kelsey. And I was like realizing that Trey's the Disney super fan. So him doing that is, again, it's like that's his personal brand. He's into this. So it's really
pouring himself into it.
Yeah, it's cool to see Trey and put himself in Swamp Fest. Like if you know Trey a little bit, you can definitely see those in it. 100%. It's really cool.
And Swamp Fest is an awesome, I guess in closing, like Swamp Fest is so awesome. And I think it's so important for people to go to it because it's 24 hours, figuratively speaking, to hang out with your homies.
Yeah.
You never get to do that. And I hope everyone turns into the ultra positive situation, keep vibes high. Let's celebrate the fact that we can all hang out. And
especially after the last few years, like being able to be in a space with so many cool people. And it's cool that this event has kind of become like the mecca. Like even people that you wouldn't expect to show up to an event in the swamp are showing up and like having the best time of their lives, you know?
It's fun, man. And And knowing the past couple ideas for Trey and the crew, or past couple years for Trey and the crew doing something, it's been really difficult. I mean, the one year they spent all that money and COVID hit and then that loss. So they're running on a deficit and trying to get it up and running. And they're doing it, honestly. Like, he doesn't make any real money on this.
Well, it's like what we were talking about earlier with like the Roots stuff. You know, you're like, you were operating at a deficit. You never took a paycheck from it. And it's like, that's true passion, you know, and like he shows up every year and somehow makes it better.
People like Trey or other people put on events, I want them to make money.
Yeah.
It'd be awesome. Is the service they're offering all of us is creating memories that are indefinite.
Yep.
So the fact that someone's putting us in a position where we can have that outcome is pretty rad.
Yeah. And they should be rewarded for that.
They should absolutely make money. BMX loves eating itself, so it wants to complain about that. But honestly, him making money is really cool. Yeah. Because if he makes money and the other dudes make money, they'll keep doing it.
That means next year it's just going to be better and better.
Yep. I mean, it's going to be, you know, and next year probably be new locations. That'll be exciting, you know.
I love it. Well, and I love like that perspective too for people who may be listening that ride BMX. It's like, if you can think about like, buy the merch, buy the things, like that makes these things even bigger, even better. And like, not that you owe it to BMX, but like BMX grows through that, and like bring somebody who's never been before, you know, like get somebody else stoked about it, because that's how you grow this and make more cool stuff like this.
It's funny because what we say to that is just be conscious.
Mm-hmm.
If you buy a shirt from someone, you know you're going to help them do the next thing, you know. So your brands, whatnot, food, bringing a friend, super important.
Yeah,
you know. I mean, how often can you go to something that you can camp and go on and really make all your own food? So it's actually, you can make it a relatively affordable weekend at the end of it all.
Yeah.
You know,
and like in reality, it's like that is the purest form of BMX. You know, like over the last few years that I've watched it from afar, it's like that is what freestyle is. Like people are out here doing exactly what they want to do in a place that's just, it's loose, you know, and that's like the ethos of what BMX is. And I feel like, you know, talking about being soft, like getting the shit in the mail, it's like same thing with events. Like we've gone so far away from like everything has to be so perfect now. So going back to kind of the roots of BMX, like the cinder block and plywood, that's basically what this is at its core. And it's just like magnified.
Yeah. It's cool. All you really need is a board and a fucking block, and you could have a fun time. Yeah. You know, I mean,
that's like, where this all came from, man.
Yeah. And this year's going to be awesome, man. I'm pretty excited. I mean, I'm ready to get out there and do some camping and drinking some beer.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it myself, man. Well, with that being said, should we wrap this thing up and go get a pint now?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Hell yeah, dude. Well, if you're enjoying these episodes, guys, we really appreciate you being here. This has been super fun, all these episodes down here in Florida. If you could if you're listening to these episodes on Spotify, Apple, or Amazon, please follow the show on the app to be notified when new episodes drop every Friday. Leave us a 5-star review, and if you're watching them on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. It greatly helps us continue to make this project happen. And with that being said, keep being scared of normal. We'll catch you on the next one. Thank you, brother.
Later.